Good afternoon, my name is Carlos Pedro, General Coordinator of ACTA. Let me welcome you all to this virtual conversatory in the world of debate and the nuclear winter and the climate winter. Una participatoria Bolivia. Yeah, we have Natalie, Abigail, Tatiana, calling from Brazil, Claudia Tamayo from Colombia, and Aida Cristiana from Peru, and moderating Carla Mejia from this event has the objective to allow you to put in place or to reflect on in the process, question process, and the status of the dispute between West and East. I mean, put into context climate change geopolitically speaking, and the great four aspects are going to arise. We hope that are key to face fight for economic and social justice. So to start, um, let me open the mic for Carla Mejia. That's going to be the moderator of this event. Let me introduce Natalie Begin from the Buffalo University with a PhD in social policy from Brazil University, researcher of poverty and inequality. This worked in the design of public policies in several governments of Brazil. She's been a part of many important private public positions and worked for Oxfam International, currently working in the direction for financial studies of Brazil, Ines, and since 2022, she's a co-chair of Latina. So Natalie, welcome for the remarks and for the presentation of this story on why it's important to debate this. Thank you, Carlos.
Gracias, Carlos.
Good morning, good afternoon to
Buenos
everyone
días, buenas
joining
tardes,
us
que están con nosotros
for this collective
para esta
reflection.
reflexión
I
colectiva.
would like to
Yo me
emphasize
gustaría
4 points,
enfatizar unos
not to take away
puntos
much of your
más
time because
para
we want
tomar
to listen
tiempo,
to
porque
a
queremos
guest.
mucho escuchar a
But
nuestros
I would say that we
invitados.
are here in Latin
Pero
America
diría que estamos en
in
América
a
Latina
sort of
como que atrapados
in
entre, de un lado, unas
wars and its
terribles
impact
guerras y sus
in the
impactos
global
en
geopolitics
la
and
geopolítica global, y de
in
otro,
between
el
global warming that's
calentamiento
getting to
global que
no
está a
return
punto
point.
de nos
We are
regresar
in the
más que todo
process of collective
en proceso
suicide
de
almost.
suicidio colectivo.
That's what's happening.
Es lo que
And we have
está
two
pasando.
processes that
Y
we
son
are
dos
ashamed of
procesos
as a
que nos
humanity
avergüenzan como humanidad
because we are not
porque
making or
no
doing
estamos
anything
logrando hacer
to
nada
avoid
para parar
this
estas
death
muertes
or this
evitables de guerras
war-related deaths,
estúpidas
which are
y
stupid,
de
and the
las
consequences of
consecuencias del
climate
cambio
change.
climático.
We have
No
people
solo son
that
personas que dejan de vivir,
stop
sino
living, but we
culturas y
have
generaciones
culture that
enteras
is
que
committed
están
and
sometidas.
we
Entonces,
have the
tenemos el
present,
presente, pero
but
también
also
el
the
futuro
future in play in this
en esta marcha de la
type of event
inmediatez, ¿no?
that we
Es un
are
poco por
facing.
eso que
That's why
bautizamos nuestro
we
libro
are
de Entre el infierno,
confronting this nuclear winter and
y el
climatic
infierno.
winter. The
Un
second
segundo
point that I would
punto
like
que
to
me
mention
gustaría
is that if there's
destacar es
something
que
different
si hay
that's
un elemento que
arising
está
in this process,
surgiendo
is that the
en este
great
proceso es
powers
que
of the
las
North
potencias del norte
are roaring.
son
There's a
surgiendo, ¿no?
new
Obviamente
geography
una nueva
emerging,
geografía
energetically speaking,
energética,
military speaking, and
militar
financially
y
speaking,
económicamente
facing the hegemonic
matriz
power of the USA
de
and
los
the
Estados Unidos y de las
decadence of
potencias del
egocentrism.
occidentalismo.
And it's a strengthening
Recordemos que
the
en los
Russian
poderes de
powers and
Rusia,
Chinese powers and the
de
awakening
China
of
y el
blocs that
despertar de bloques
continue
que vienen
growing now, like
como el
BRICS
caso
and
del
BRICS
BRICS,
Plus,
ahora
from the
BRICS Plus,
African Union
de la
that's
Unión
taking
Africana, que gana
an
un
important step and
importante
protagonism,
protagonismo y que
and
ahora
now
ya
it's a
se
part of
convierte
G20. In
del
my
G20.
opinion, the big challenge here
En mi opinión,
is
el
that
gran
in
reto
this new
es que
configuration, in this
en la
new
nueva
setup,
configuración es que
that
no,
it
ella
doesn't
tampoco
seem
consigue traer
to bring
respuestas válidas a las
proper
reales
answers to
más
these great aches
que
that we
estos
are still
tiempos
facing
están trayendo,
of constant increase of
calentamiento
temperature,
global,
poverty,
agricultura y el
hunger,
hambre, la
and increase of
pobreza y
inequalities.
la desigualdad.
So in Latin America,
Entonces,
we
nosotros en
are
América Latina estamos
in the middle of all this, and
en
not
medio de todo
to
esto y para no
be
sucumbir,
defeated
para hacer
and to
frente
face these pressures
a estas
that come from this
presiones derivadas de esta nueva
geopolitical
dinámica
dynamics,
geopolítica,
we would have to be
tendríamos
united. I think
que
that that's
unirnos, ¿no?
one
Me
of the
parece que esa es una de
few
las pocas
solutions that we
salidas
have,
que
and that's
tenemos
why
y por eso
regional
una
integration
integración regional
is more
es
necessary than
más que
ever.
nunca
And due to this reason, there's the LATNet,
Por estos
which is a
motivos,
network that's
una
seeking
red que busca
after constantly being
permanentemente
connected
estar
and
conectada
adjourned
y ayornada,
with
como
their
dicen los
time,
italianos,
that
con su tiempo,
opens a new
hay
area,
una
which is
nueva
this area
área
that
que es esta
Carola
área que Carola
guides
escoge para
to
discutir
work on
temas
sun
sobre
and
estaciones y
climatic justice and
Amazonía.
transition. One of the objectives of
Los
this
objetivos de
conversatory
este
that we're about to
conversatorio
start
que ahora empezamos
is precisely
em,
to
es
position
justamente
this
situar y
new
posicionar
key
esta nueva
area in the
área
global context.
en la
So the
coyuntura global.
reflections that
Entonces,
come
aquí
around and
las
arise
reflexiones que haremos hoy
today with our
estos
panelists and with
días
the audience,
con
we
ustedes, con la
hope
audiencia,
that aid us
esperamos que nos ayuden
into
a
having a
tener
more
una
active
actuación más efectiva y
action with
cercana
people and
a los
territories.
pueblos y a los
So that's why
territorios.
I always say that
Por eso
one a little
digo que una
provocation
pequeña
is that
provocación que
maybe
hago acá
Latin
para
that
nuestra red. La TENDAD
should be
viene a
called the
llamarse
Latin
Red
American Network
Alternativa
for
Latinoamericana para
Financial,
Justicia
Social, and Climate
Económica,
Justice.
Social
But
y Climática,
thank you very
¿no?
much, and let's hope
Gracias y
that
equipo
we
de
have a
trabajo
nice few
para
works
nosotros.
session. Thank you, Natalie, for putting up into the limelight these important objectives and our purpose as Latinat onto organizing this conversatory. Now let me open the mic for moderation of the event to our colleague Carola Mejia, which is a Bolivian economist from Catholic University of São Paulo, Masters in Financial Development with Sustainable Development and Environment approach in social studies from the Netherlands. Carola has over 15 years of experience in public stations, private positions, and in international cooperation, providing consultants in environmental matters that are related to climate change, onto the sustainable urban development, and of course, on climate financing, which are also important matters. He's been coordinator of previous regional summits related to climate change and environmental matters. And this year, she's now the coordinator of recently created Vice Climatic Transition for Amazon's area created by Latin. Please go ahead, Carla. Thank you very much, Carlos and
Muchas gracias,
Natalie. Thank you
Carlos.
for your
Pues
opening
Natalie
remarks.
también
Good
por tus
afternoon.
palabras de
Thank you
apertura.
for
Muy buenas
joining us,
tardes. Muchas gracias
everyone,
por
in
acompañarnos,
the
tanto a las personas
Zoom
que están en
platform
Zoom como las
and
personas que están
following
siguiendo
us
la transmisión
and
en las redes
watching
de
our
NTV y
broadcast
también de
through
Latindad.
our
Es un
websites.
gusto para nosotros
It's
tener este
true that
conversatorio,
these are
que si bien
complex
es sobre
matters,
temas
and
complejos,
we that's why
hemos
we've
invitado
invited
justamente a personas
experts that have been
expertas
working
que
in
vienen
this
trabajando en estas
thematics and
temáticas y que nos
topics
van
that
a
are going to share
compartir
important and relevant
información bastante relevante
information,
para analizar
basic
el
context,
contexto de crisis
the
múltiple, la
multiple
coyuntura
uh,
y ver cómo, qué
situations that we're facing
implicaciones
at the
tienen
same
estas
time and
crisis,
what the
especialmente
impacts
para la
are in the
región,
regions,
¿no?
to think
Con el
about
fin de pensar
alternatives
en
and think
alternativas y
about
cómo
how to
irnos preparando
plan
también
to
para
reduce the impacts.
reducir estos
I would
impactos.
like to invite
Quisiera
people
invitarles
that
a las
are
personas que
not
no hablan español,
non-Spanish speakers.
tenemos el servicio
I'd like to invite you
interpretación o
to our
traducción al
interpretation
portugués y
service,
al
which
inglés.
is
Pueden
located
activarlo
down
en
below in
el
your
menú que está
toolbar.
abajo en el Zoom.
And we will have first
Y bueno, vamos a tener
round
primero
of
una nota
presentations where
de
we
las
have key
presentaciones.
experts
Tenemos
that
a
are
tres
going to be
personas, tres
making
expertos
a
que van a estar
presentation. Martin
presentando.
Vilela,
Martín
researcher
Vilela,
and Bolivian activist of
investigador
climate
y
justice,
activista
has
boliviano
worked
de
in
justicia
a thousand
climática. Ha trabajado
and
desde el
60 matters
2006
related
en
to
temas relacionados con
social
la gestión
management of
social del
water
agua,
and climate
el
change
cambio
alongside
climático,
base
junto con
organizations
organizaciones de
developing
base, realizando
uh,
investigaciones sobre
projects
incidencia
doing
política,
social
fortaleciendo
justice and
organizaciones
developing
y
campaigns
articulando
of
campañas
social
de justicia
and
climática y
climate
transición
justice.
justa.
Martin has been a part of the
Martín ha
negotiations and
seguido las
framework
negociaciones
convention
por
of the
la
United
Convención
Nations of
Marco
Climate
de
Change since
Naciones Unidas sobre
2010.
Cambio
And
Climático
he has
desde
a
el
huge
2010.
rate as a part of
Tuvo
the
una gran
organizing
trayectoria,
committee
es
of the
parte del
flow
Comité
campaign to
Coordinador
demand
de la
global
campaña
justice.
global para acelerar la
Currently, he
justicia
works
climática.
partially for the
Actualmente
campaign of
trabaja a
climate
tiempo
of
parcial
corporate
para la campaña
accountability,
de clima
and
de
he's the
Corporate
facilitator
Accountability
of the
y es
campaign Make the Bill,
facilitador de la
Terminators
campaña
to
que
Pay
paguen
for
los
the
grandes
Latin American
contaminadores para
Caribbean
la
regions.
región
So
América
welcome,
Latina y
Martin.
el Caribe.
And after
Bienvenido,
Martin, we
Martín.
have a
Después
presentation
de
of Julia
Martín, vamos
Herlo.
a tener la
She's a
presentación
member
de
of
Julia
the
Herlo.
investigation
Ella
device
es miembro del
team
equipo de
of harm in
investigación de
Argentina.
FARO
She is a licensed in
Argentina,
political science from the
licenciada de Ciencias
Rosario
Políticas por la
University,
Universidad
and a
Nacional del
master's in urban
Rosario
economics by
y
the
máster en
University
Economía
of
Urbana por la
Torcuato Vitela.
Universidad
She's got
Torcuato
experience
de
in the
Perú.
environment and
Tiene
development
experiencia en
sector,
el sector
working
de
in different
ambiente, desarrollo,
organizations
trabajando en
like
diversas
WDI,
organizaciones internacionales como
UNESCO, and
WWI,
also the public
UNESCO
sector of
y
their
también el
country.
sector público de su
And
país.
we will have a
Y
presentation of
finalmente vamos
Enrique
a tener
Daza.
la
He's from
presentación
Colombia.
de
He's a
Enrique Daza. Él es
psychologist,
de Colombia,
president
es
of the
psicólogo,
Joint
presidente de la
Commission of
Junta Directiva
Work
del
on
Centro de
Labor,
Trabajo,
creator
director
of
de 80
the
números de
Slinger
la revista
magazine, secretary of the
Slinger,
Continental
exsecretario
Social
de la Alianza
Alliance, and
Social
Enrique
Continental.
is a
Y
writer
también Enrique es
uh,
columnista de las dos
of
orientaciones en
financial
temas
and
de política
geopolitical
económica y
columns.
geopolítica.
So Martin
Martín,
and
Julia
Enrique are
y
going to make
Enrique nos van a
15-minute
hacer
presentations,
presentaciones
and
cada una de
afterwards we will
15
go to
minutos y después
comments
vamos a
round.
pasar a
And
una
I would
ronda
like
de
to welcome
comentarios.
three
Quisiera darle la
individuals
bienvenida
that will be
también a todas las
joining us
personas
in
que nos
these
acompañarán
comments
en esta
First, we
ronda de
will have
comentarios.
Tatiana
La
Oliveira.
primera será
She's
Tatiana
a
Oliveira.
public policy
Ella es
consultant in
asesora en políticas
environmental rights
públicas y
for the
derechos
social
socioambientales del Instituto de
financial
Estudios
studies in NES,
Socioeconómicos
doctor in
INES,
political science
doctora en
with
ciencias
international
políticas, con
relations and
especialización en
sustainable
relaciones
development, and
internacionales y
researcher from
desarrollo
the Latin
sostenible
American
e
Council of
investigadora del
Social Sciences
Consejo
Department and
Latinoamericano de Ciencias
research
Sociales Claxo y del Centro de Estudios
studies
Alto
for the Pará
Amazónicos de
University.
la Universidad Federal de
After
Pará.
that, we will have the participating
Después
Claudia
estará
Maria Tamayo. She's a
participando Claudia María
sociologist,
Tamayo. Ella es
specialist in
socióloga, especialista en
environmental
innovación
social
sociocultural y pedagogía
studies
social,
from
integrante de la
IPC, the
Junta
Popular
Directiva del
Study for
IPC, el
Training, which
Instituto
is a
Popular
member
de
organization
Capacitación,
from
que es
Latin Colombia.
organización de Latinidad en
For
Colombia.
over 14 years, he
Por
worked
más de
with the
14 años trabajó
theory of
con
Medellin
Medellín en
Antioquia
Medellín, luego
governance
profesora
and
de
programs and
Antioquia,
projects related to
programas,
local
proyectos relacionados
development
con
with the
planeación del desarrollo
participative budget.
local, el
Is a
presupuesto
member
y
of the Directive
participativos.
Board
Es
of
integrante de la
Cooperation
Junta
for
Directiva de la
Solidarity,
Corporación para el Fomento de
State
Finanzas
Finances, and
Agrarias,
also
comentamos,
Confianza
también
Official,
directiva de
which
Confiar,
works at different
Instituto de Alta
instances,
Financiera en varias
writer of
instancias, es
kids'
escritora de
books,
cuentos
and
infantiles,
also a member of the
narradora y
Directive
también
Council of
integra el
Latin
Consejo Directivo de
Network.
Latindad
And
de
finally, we will have
Barcelona.
the comments
Y finalmente vamos
of
a tener
Aida
los
Garcia
comentarios
Naranjo,
de
Mocha
Aida
from
García
Peru,
Naranjo.
which is currently the
Mocha
president of the
es actualmente
Reality Without
presidenta de
Frontiers,
Realidad Sin
ambassador of
Fronteras,
Peru
fue
in the
embajadora del Perú
Uruguay,
frente
representative
al
of Peru in
Uruguay,
the Latin American
representante de Perú en la
Association of
Asociación
Integration to
Latinoamericana de
ADI and
Integración
Mercosur,
LADI
and also the
y el
president for
Mercosur.
the Committee of
También fue
Representatives
presidenta del
of
Comité de
ADI and Ministry
Representantes de
of
LADI y
Women
ministra de la
and
Mujer y el
Development. We
Desarrollo.
have a
Después
panel of
tenemos un
speakers
panel
and
de
commenters of high
presentadores,
level,
presentadoras,
which we
comentaristas de
appreciate
muy
quite a
alto
lot for
nivel.
their
Les agradecemos
availability, for
muchísimo
their
por su
time, and we
disponibilidad,
are
su
going to
tiempo
be more than
y nos va a dar
thrilled
muchísimo
to
gusto
hear from
escuchar,
you, to
pues,
learn from you,
aprender
and
de
we hope that
ustedes
together we can
y que
analyze
todos
this
juntas
political and
analicemos
current
esta
context.
coyuntura.
So
Así
I'll
que
open
voy
the
a
mic
darle
for
la
Martin,
palabra
and I would like
a
to tell you
Martín,
that after
indicándoles
these
también que
presentations and
después de mi
comment round, we will
presentación, desde la
open
ronda de
for
comentarios,
a
vamos a abrir una ronda
Q&A
de
round in
preguntas,
public and
respuestas
audience
y
participation,
participación
so
del
we
público,
can
para lo cual les
uh,
invitamos en su momento
do our
a
own
levantar la
make our own
mano o
questions. You
también si
can
quieren
raise your
hacer sus
hand in the
preguntas por
reactions, or
el
you
chat.
can write it
Bueno, no
in
por el chat, sino
the
por
chat box.
por
Well, actually, not the
en
chat
este
box,
momento
but
que
the
tenemos de
Q&A
preguntas y
box, and you
respuestas,
can write
también
them
pueden
down
ponerlas por allí
and
escrito,
also
indicando a
write
mi
down who this
panelista
question is for.
responde.
So,
Así
Martin,
que, por
after
favor, Martín,
each speaker, we
cada
will have 15
presentador
minutes,
va a
and
tener
we will
15
start with
minutos.
you, if not
Empezamos contigo, yo te hago recuerdo si es que ya
on
estamos
time. Thank you very
al final de
much
tu
for your
tiempo. Así
time,
que
and you can
muchísimas
start,
gracias.
Martin.
Puedes empezar.
Thank you very much, Carola, and thank you very
Muchísimas
much,
gracias,
Latin,
Carol, y
for this
muchísimas gracias a Latinidad
invitation.
por
I
esta
really
invitación. La verdad me siento
feel
muy
honored to be able
honrado
to
de
share
poder
the space with
compartir
you.
en este espacio.
I had
Bueno,
a
se nos dio
challenge
el
of
reto de
starting in
iniciar
this
este
panel,
panel
providing a bit of
con el
context
contexto de todos
onto
estos
these
temas
topics that as we've
que
heard
pues ya se
before.
mencionaron, incluso el
The
objeto
matter of our gathering
de
today.
este evento.
Definitely,
Y
this is a
definitivamente
topic that
es una
has a lot
temática que
of
tiene
factors in
muchísimas
come into
aristas y
play in our cell phone.
muchísimo detalle.
So
Entonces,
I
no
can't get to that
profundizar
much detail
tan
today, but
detallista, pero voy a
I'll
tratar de
try
hacer
to give you a quick overview.
un pantallazo
So let
muy
me share
general.
my
Así que
screen for a
voy a
second.
compartir mi pantalla.
Can you see that?
¿Sí la pueden ver?
Yes, we can.
Sí, ahora sí. Estamos, ya la vemos.
Perfecto. Vamos a ver, voy a ocultar esto para poder ver.
A moment, please. All right then. So
Perfecto, bueno.
as you know, we've
Pues
been
en lo que
living
estamos viviendo
for
desde hace
the last few
pues,
years
varios
a
años,
more alarming
proceso cada
process
vez más
of
alarmante
systemic
de
crisis,
crisis
which
sistémica
basically has a lot of
que
factors
tiene
and
múltiples
many
múltiples
complications that come into play. They are
complicaciones,
all
todas
interrelated,
interrelacionadas,
obviously,
obviamente,
and they are
y
based
que se basan
practically and initially
básicamente y
on the
inicialmente en un
financial
sistema
organization and
de
political
organización
system
económica y
that the
política
planet is
que está llevando el planeta
or is taking the
a los
planet to
límites
the most
más
extreme
difíciles.
level. We
Estamos
are
viviendo una
witnessing
crisis
a financial
económica. La
crisis,
crisis
which is
económica
not a
no es
cyclical
una
one
crisis
like the one
económica
that we've always
cíclica
had,
como la que
but
siempre hemos
rather we
tenido,
are having it
sino
at
que
a
está habiendo
moment
un
that
momento en
we,
el
as
cual
Natalie
estamos,
said,
como decía Natalie,
getting to
llegando a
non-return
los
points.
puntos de no retorno
And then that regularly
y
the
que
cycles
normalmente estos ciclos
usually are
siempre son resueltos
posed or
a
resolved
través
through
de
the increasing of
incrementar el
extractivism
extractivismo,
or generating more
más
labor
organización laboral,
flexibility, protecting rights, or
reducción
reducing the
de
protection
derechos,
of rights,
protección
protection of environment,
el medio ambiente
just in general
en
terms.
general, ¿no?
And
Eso es lo que podemos
now that
esperar
we are in a moment
que
of
está pasando en
crisis,
este momento de crisis, es que en el
at
futuro
all times of
todos
Latin
los
America and
países
in the world, we will have a process of inter-deepening into this model that's destroying the planet. This obviously is going to increase inequality, is going to generate greater food crisis, migration. We are talking about climate migration, but of course, the climate crisis itself. As we can see, there's a decrease in the mid-range income, and this is for the private sector of the US. But this is basically a reflection of what's happening in the world, and this has to take us to a planning of the strategies that these big stakeholders of state and corporate sectors use to have a greater profitability of their own destructive actions. The drama for Latin America is that we are conditioned to a world that measures development only through financial growth. And what we can see is that there's a disacceleration of the economy, but we also are witness of desperation in the political processes that are ongoing or taking place in the region to be able to move forward with a precarization of people's conditions or a greater exploitation level of nature. We can see that I analyze that politically speaking in countries that have their own characteristics and features. The geopolitical tensions that we live in the world, generally speaking, are part of this strategy. For me, they are another element that allows us to and allows this elite to be positioned and to avoid the systemic change to happen. And that's why we need these tensions, these geopolitical tensions, not only allow the degradation of democracy, but also decreases the participation of the population in decision making, demanding rights, because it becomes a security matter. And this is only a channel through which big geostrategic powers, like, for example, the historically developed emerging countries, are fighting over the domain of resources, geopolitical influence, etc. So, and at the end of the day, it ends up submitting the majority of the population. So the relation between this discussion of militarism and climate is always really cruel because on one side there's a global war phenomenon unchanged and consolidates an energetic matrix based on fossil fuels, and the war machinery cannot move with green energy. So that's a big problem, and this is a study of the Transnational Institute that shows a bit of this relation. And these are the countries that make more emissions and the amount of money on financing wars and militarism will end up being enough to finance climate action, which would be more sustainable and a real climate action that could be the start of a more fair transition. However, these are the countries that should be providing financing. They don't end up giving annually what they should give out in climate financing. So quickly, this is a more global scenario. In the last few months or in last year, it was kind of a hard year for everyone that worked with climate change and environmentalism. There's been many reports that show an unprecedented status that we hope to witness in many decades. However, we are already in witness of it right now. This is a scenario that shows us how have we surpassed five of the new nine planetary limits.
límites planetarios.
And obviously,
Y
it
pues
carried out a lot
como,
with it.
como lo mencioné,
Like I said
como
last
decía, el año
year,
pasado han
there's been
salido un
lots of
montón
reports and
de
observations
reportes
from
de
phenomenon
observaciones de
that
fenómenos
had no
que no tenían
precedent.
precedentes,
A storm that in a few
naturalmente que
hours
en muy pocas
became
horas se
a
convirtió
hurricane in
en un
Mexico,
huracán
and we had
en
the collapse
México,
of the
el colapso
sea,
de las corrientes marinas,
the sea
las
currents,
gotas de
the degradation of the
colapso
Amazon, the polar,
de los
or
polos, las cascas
the
polares,
polar
que
extremes
se
being
están en este
melted.
momento
So
criticando
we,
muchos
and many scientists
científicos
are
lo están
debating this,
padeciendo, pero ya
but
opinan
this
que el
represents
colapso climático es
an
inevitable, que lo
unavoidable climate
viviremos, que lo
collapse, and
estamos
we have
empezando
to,
a vivir
or we
en
are
los
going to be
últimos
living it
años.
in the next
Entonces, esto es algo que realmente nos
decade.
tiene que
And
llamar
this
a la
is something
emergencia.
that needs to call
Los
action, to an
niveles de
emergency action.
concentración de gases de efecto
The
invernadero
carbon
han
limits have not
superado los 80 mil
surpassed limits that we've never
nunca
seen
antes
before.
visto.
The
Las
measurements of temperature
mediciones
behavior
de
from last
comportamiento de la
year
temperatura
have
del año
been
pasado
from
han
afar the
sido de
highest,
lejos
the
las más altas, el
warmest
año
year
más
ever
cálido jamás
registered.
registrado.
And this year it seems like
Este año parece
we
que
are
estamos
in
viendo
a
una
more
historia
dramatic
aún
pathway.
más
The
dramática.
first days of
Los
February
primeros
that
días de
we've
febrero
registered
registrados
are
son
widely
mucho más
higher
fríos
than the
comparados
previous
con los de
years
los
and
años
even the
precedentes
last
y el año
years.
pasado.
So looking at
Mirar
and
y
facing
abordar la
climate
crisis
change and climate
climática en esta
crisis in this
perspectiva es
aspect
muy
is
complejo
uh,
porque no hay un solo elemento
difficult
que
because
se
there's no
puede
element that can be
priorizar
prioritized
totalmente
really
y
and that we
abordar
can focus on
únicamente.
uniquely.
Entonces, no es
So the
solo la
amount,
cantidad
participation, or
o
renewable
participación de
energies
energías renovables,
in
digamos,
relation of
en relación a
fossil fuels or
las energías
fossil
fósiles,
energy,
pero
uh,
lo que se puede ver
it's
es que
not
la
enough.
tendencia
But
es
we
que
are at least in a
sigue una
trend of
tendencia de
increasing
incrementar el
the
costo
use of this
de la
energy, and in a
energía,
way,
y esto
in a greater or lesser measure,
en mayor o
this
menor medida, ya
can
sea
become into
medidas
a
de
green
energía verde
energy
o
system, but it will also
renovable,
generate
tienen
an
un impacto
impact on
en las
carbon
emisiones de
dioxide
dióxido de
emissions.
carbono.
But of course, that's not the only
Esta no es la
factor. The
única
other
cosa.
factor
El parte
is
de
that
esta es que
we
hay
have
responsables
people that are liable,
históricos
who have
de esta
responsible
crisis climática
parties
que
to
no se
this.
ponen ante ello
And
porque no se lo creen,
historically, we have this debt, and we
olvidar
shouldn't
porque
forget.
no
And
quieren ser
it needs to
parte
be
ni
part
el
of the
centro de
core of
las
the discussion.
discusiones.
How are we demanding that
Se
these
exige
countries
que estos
that are
países
mainly
que
responsible for
son
the climate
principalmente
crisis,
responsables de la
and
crisis climática
also those that
y
are
además quienes
in this
están hoy en esta carrera armamentística
armamentistic type of
y impulsando todos los
marathon
procesos
in
eh,
implementing militarization
de
processes, they need
militarización
to pay for their
paguen
historic
la
debt
deuda
that they
histórica
have,
que tienen
not just with
no solo
southern
los
countries,
países del sur,
which is important
y aquí es importante hacer
to
esa
make that
conversión,
specification, but
sino con
also
el
to the
sur
global
global.
south.
Y el sur
The global
global
south, we understand it
lo
in
entendemos
many different sectors of climate
muchos
justice, not
sectores
just
de gestión
as the
climática,
southern
no
countries
solamente
or
como los
in
países
pathways or in its ways of
desarrollados, sino
development,
las
but also
poblaciones
territories that are
y
being
territorios que están siendo
are being
sometidos.
pushed and
Entonces
submitted.
podemos encontrar un sur global
So
también
we
en
can also
estas,
take into account these
¿no?
communities
Estas
that
comunidades
historically have been
que han sido
relegated.
históricamente
But that's a different
relegadas.
part, a different
Pero bueno, esa
factor,
es otra
which is
parte de una
also
discusión muy, muy
complex.
compleja.
When we think about
Cuando
emissions
profundizamos en la
per
reflexión
individual and the
profunda, igual
complexity of
la
it
complejidad
increases.
aumenta.
And in many
Entonces,
other scenarios, we can see
escenarios que
that.
parecen ya
And it has
irreversibles,
to do
como
with the
pueden
intensity,
ser
but in countries of
climatologías
Latin America, it has to do
Sudamérica
with the
tiene que ver
destruction
mucho con la
of
destrucción
forests, particularly in
de
the
bosques,
Amazon.
particularmente en la
So
Amazonia.
this is another element
Entonces, este es
that
otro elemento
makes it a bit
que
more
complica
complicated.
aún más, ¿no?
Another
Uno de los
element
elementos
that
que
is
no
so
está
so
realmente
visible in the discussion
visible en los
processes
procesos de discusión
of climate
de
international
la política
policy
climática
is
internacional
that,
es este,
or how
es
the
cómo la
highest
gran
elites,
élite,
how
el
this 10%
10%
from
de la
this
población,
Oxford
estamos
study, how
hablando,
is the
ya lo
10%
conocen,
of the
el
British
10% de la
population
población más rica
has the same type of emissions
tiene las mismas emisiones que
than 50% that's the
el
poorest,
50%
or
más
than
pobre,
a 90%
o el
actually,
90% más
which
pobre,
is
digamos,
poor and middle class
clase media pobre
of the world. So
del mundo,
clearly,
¿no? Entonces,
the
claramente,
relation between
la relación
wealth
entre concentración de
concentration and
riqueza
destruction
y
of the planet,
destrucción del planeta,
greenhouse
emisiones de gases de
emissions,
efecto invernadero,
etc., it's direct.
es
And then
directo
it's
y es
necessary to
necesario
put
poner
this as one of the
instrumentos,
key
elementos
elements
culturales para
to
empezar a
start
debatir una
generating
transición, una
energetic
transición energética, una
transition, a
transición
systemic change.
un cambio sistémico.
Unfortunately, and after its
Desafortunadamente,
creation,
desde su
And after 30 years or 32 years
32 años
of climate
de
discussions,
discusiones climáticas,
even though
se
we've
han
taken
dado
some
algunos
steps,
pasos,
we are
estamos
still
muy
far
lejos
from confronting
de
or
mitigar la
fixing
crisis
climate
climática.
change the most proper
Las
way. The
políticas que
policies that
se han
have
expresado en los
shown
NDCs,
into the
en los
NDCs and the
compromisos
commitments that have been
nacionalmente
established by countries
determinados de los
are
países están muy
further
lejos de
from putting us in the right
condicionarnos nuestra
way,
trayectoria para
even
bajar la temperatura
with
ni siquiera en 2 grados
within 2
centígrados
degrees
y mucho
or
menos en
1.5.
2025.
And the result
Y
of
el
this last
resultado
global
del
balance
balance global
in the Framework Convention at the
de la
United
Convención
Nations
Marco de
says
Naciones
that
Unidas nos dicen que
with
con las
the current promises,
promesas
we
actuales
will be
tenemos que llegar a
surpassing
los 2.7
2.7
grados
degrees,
centígrados.
centigrade degrees.
Y
And I would like
quiero
to
resaltar aquí
highlight
ahora
and
estas,
underscore promises. There's a
hay
lot
mucha
between a
distancia entre
promise
la promesa
and this
y
promise to
esta
become a
promesa
reality
llegar a
and for
nuestra
it to
realidad
be an
y cuán
ongoing one.
efectiva será.
Sadly, many of these
Desafortunadamente, muchas de
promises
estas promesas, o la gran mayoría de
are
estas promesas,
basically or are
son
based
basadas en
on
lo que
climate justice
los
movements
movimientos de
that
justicia climática
we basically call
llamamos
fake
como
solutions like carbon
soluciones,
market,
mercados de
capture
carbono,
and sanitation of
captura y almacenamiento
carbon,
de carbono,
energy with a
energía
biomass
con plantas de
approach, and some
biomasa,
other solutions.
entre otros.
Another topic,
Otro de
and this
los
is something
temas
that I would
en
like to
este
make more
sentido, que
emphasis
quiero hacer
on,
un poco más de
and it
énfasis,
has been
y es
completely
totalmente
overlooked
ligado
in this
a lo que
international and even
denominamos las
national
conferencias
scenarios,
de incluso
is what
nacionales,
the
es cuál es la
historic and
responsabilidad
current
histórica, pero también
responsibility of
responsabilidad de
the
grandes corporaciones,
corporations, in this case,
en
not
este
just
caso son
corporations, but
corporaciones
national
y
companies as well,
empresas nacionales
of
de
fossil fuel.
combustibles fósiles.
And clearly, what is
Y
this
claramente lo que
study
muestra
shows
este estudio
is that
es que las
25
25
decades operations
empresas
of
más
oil,
grandes de
gas
gas, petróleo y carbón
are
son
responsible
responsables
of
de un
50% of
50% de
historic
las
emissions
emisiones históricas
of greenhouse emissions.
de gases de efecto
And
invernadero.
here,
Y aquí
I'll try to go as
voy a
fast as I
tratar de ir
can,
lo más rápido.
but here
Aquí
it's important to highlight
es
that
importante resaltar
from the
es que
creation of
desde
this
la
convention,
creación de la convención, las corporaciones han tenido un rol
corporations have had a decisive role
decisivo
in the making of
en
this
el
discussion,
transcurso
in the
de
long
estas
path of the
discusiones.
discussion. In the
En los
70s,
años 70 ya
they've already had
las
information
corporaciones
about
tenían
how can
información de
they
cómo estas
influence
actividades podían
in
influir
the
el clima
scope. They
y sin
decided to
ocultar esa
hide
información se
this
lanzaron
information
campañas de
and starting
negacionismo
negationists
se
and
lanzaron
campaigns,
a
paying
institutos de
research
investigación
studies so they
para que
could back up
respalden
their
esas
position,
posiciones
and they have
y han
participated
participado de
actively
manera activa
under different strategies in the
distintas
processes of
estrategias en los
negotiation, not
procesos de
just
negociación,
financing these
no
negotiation
solamente
processes,
financiando estos
but
procesos de negociación,
also
pero
through
también a través
um,
de estrategias de
financing
cabildeo,
strategies
del
to
financiamiento
organisms
a
that represent
organismos
that,
que
and even
representan
consulting
e
with
incluso
delegations
asesorando
of
a
countries.
delegaciones de países.
And this is something that
Y
has been
esto
happening
se está haciendo
systematically
sistemáticamente
for a long time
desde
already.
hace mucho
This is a
tiempo.
research that
Esto se
shows
está
us how the
manifestando
Paris
como desde el
Agreement and
Acuerdo de
the
París,
big
estas
corps
grandes
have
corporaciones
sent
han
over
enviado
these delegates that
estos delegados
represent them at different
en
levels and in
distintos
different
niveles y de distintas formas.
environments. The
Obviamente,
most outrageous thing is that last year the
el año
presidency
pasado la
will fall
presidencia cayó sobre
under an
un
executive
ejecutivo
of a
de la
transnational
empresa
company
transnacional, bueno,
of
sí,
Saudi Arabia.
de Arabia Saudita.
And now the
Hoy
presidency
la
will be
presidencia la
held
tendrá un
by
ex
a former executive
director ejecutivo
of fossil
la
fuel
compañía de
company.
combustibles fósiles
And
y
clearly,
claramente estos
these
intereses
interests are
son
represented and
representados
are
y son
defended in
defendidos
these
en estos
spaces.
spaces. Las
Corporations
corporaciones han
find
creado
mechanisms to
mecanismos
generate
para generar
financing to
financiamiento
specialized
a
organisms
organismos
in
especializados
climate
en
incidents,
la
like, for
incidencia
example,
climática,
IETA,
como por ejemplo
which is
IETA, que es
an
una
entity
entidad
that groups the interests of
creada
all
para
these
respaldar todas
transnationals
estas transnacionales
so they
para
can
promover
promote the
el
commerce of
comercio
these emissions.
cíclico.
They're the
Son
main
los principales
encouragers
impulsores
of this
de los
compensation
sistemas de
system and of
compensación y
selling
de
of
venta
carbon
de
credit,
créditos de
which
carbono,
we consider
que consideramos que
false
son falsas
solutions.
soluciones.
And as I was saying,
Y como les decía,
they
no solamente
not only
financian,
finance,
pero
but they
también
also
envían
send over delegates
delegados dentro
through their national
de
delegation.
las delegaciones nacionales. Eh, Solamente como un ejemplo, se
So
hizo un estudio sobre
the
las
net
promesas
zero
del saldo neto
promises which
de
are brought, we have
carbón,
established that
y
only
se determinó
10% of
que
the
solamente el
emissions
10% de
are
estos países
considered
no
within
consideraron
the
desde luego
promises of
de sus
net
promesas de
zero
cero
or
neto,
carbon
carbono
neutrality.
neutralidad,
And
y que
they
estas
overall
en general generan
won't
un
generate
impacto,
any change.
algunas
Some of them are
ineficiencias,
inefficient greatly, some of them are inefficient and
ineficiencias
generate collateral
medioambientales, por
damage,
ejemplo,
like the
el
financing
financiamiento
of mega
de
projects
represas
in
en
Colombia
Colombia
or
o
the
de
schemes
esquemas
of
de
tree
plantación de
planting in
árboles
Colombia. And
en
this
este estudio
study,
demuestra
the research shows us
claramente
that.
esto, y que en última
And
instancia
this
esta
corporation
corporación está
pretends to
pretendiendo
extract in the next few
extraer
years
en los
or
próximos
surpass
años
this,
supera la
those
demanda de los
of
países altos
the
desarrollados,
developed European countries.
europeos. Perdón. Eh, Paralelamente a esto, la
As
forma
I
en
mentioned at
que
the beginning of the
Rusia principalmente
presentation, the way
también la
that
forma en
countries
que
in
los
this region
países en nuestra
are
región están
confronting
afrontando
this financial
este
crisis
proceso de
process
crisis económica
is putting
es
aside the
poniendo a un
discussion of
lado la
climate
discusión
crisis,
política,
environmental
la discusión
crisis, and
ambiental,
more
y más bien
going after a
buscando
model that
algo
we
que
know
sabemos
it's not sustainable
que
and
no es
that we know
sostenible,
won't generate the change
que
that
no
we
va a
need
generar
and that we know it
crisis
won't
ambiental,
allow
que
us
no va a
that
permitir que
as a
la
humanity to
humanidad
act
actúe en manera consecuente
properly
con la
to the
dimensión de
dimension
la
of the
crisis
climate
climática
crisis that
que
we currently have.
hoy tenemos.
If we can close our
Entonces,
presentation,
vamos a
please.
ir
We
cerrando,
are
por
over our
favor, la
time.
presentación. Ya estamos sobre el tiempo.
And
Sí, disculpe.
yeah, facing all these
Entonces,
attacks from
este ataque
corporations that
de las
goes from
corporaciones
increasing
que va desde
extractivism and proposing
establecer
fake solutions to
y
climate
proponer
crisis,
falsas soluciones a la
obviously
crisis climática,
from the
obviamente
organizations of
desde las
climate justice and
organizaciones
from
de justicia
the indigenous
climática, desde
populations from
los
all territories.
pueblos
There's not
indígenas
only a
de territorios,
resistance
hay no solamente
to
una resistencia
these fake solutions, to the
estas
solutions
falsas
based in
soluciones a las
nature,
amenazas a
in
nuestra naturaleza, a los
becoming
procesos de cero
carbon neutral,
neutralidad,
or the mechanisms of
a los mecanismos
compensation
de
and
compensación y comercio de
for
emisiones de
the
bosques, pero
but
también
here I also would like
aquí,
to
y quiero pues
second
sumarme a
Natalie's
lo que dijo
remarks
Natalie,
that
creo
the
que lo
best or
más
most
importante
important
que
part
nos hace
is to
sumarse
generate some
es
sort of
generar
critical mass that would
una
demand
masa crítica que
structural
exija
changes at the
cambios
same time
estructurales al mismo
that
tiempo que
it lives and it
vive
continues
y
being
continúa siendo
a life
una
which is
vida
the
que es
response for the answer to
la
this crisis.
respuesta a esta crisis, ¿no? Entonces,
Just that.
solamente
Thank you very
eso
much, and I'm sorry
quería
about
decir.
taking much.
Muchísimas gracias y
No,
disculpen
thank you very much to you, Martin,
No,
and for
muchísimas
everything
gracias
that
a ti,
you've
Martín, por todo
presented.
lo que
It's
nos has
really
presentado.
concerning
Realmente
where
es
we are
bastante
living.
preocupante lo que
And with
estamos
everything that
viviendo
you've mentioned, we
y
now
todo lo que nos
understand a
has
bit better
comentado.
the
Ya
challenges
entendemos
of the
mejor
climate
los
crisis in
desafíos
its
de la crisis
context of
climática en este contexto de crisis
multiple
múltiple,
crises. That's a
¿no?
systemic
Como
crisis,
una
which
crisis
is a product
sistémica,
of a
realmente
capitalistic system,
producto de un
extractivist
sistema
system that
capitalista,
only
extractivista,
is
que solo
seeking
busca
after
acumular y crecer,
um,
¿no? Y de
gathering
manera
and
muy
accumulating.
injusta.
So thank you very
Entonces,
much for
pues
giving us this
hablar de esta
outlook
mirada y
and
esta
approach of
perspectiva de
climate
justicia
justice
climática,
that aims towards
apuntando a los
bringing
grandes
the
responsables
historic
históricos, actuales, tanto a
responsible at
nivel de
the country
países
level
como a
and
nivel
at the
también de
level
estratos económicos,
of
de
the
la población
finances,
o a
at
nivel
the
de
corporation
corporaciones,
level that
aunque
right now
no
are
tienen realmente
not
ningún
called
llamado a
out
hacer
or not
transformaciones,
mandated
más
to
bien
make any
están
change. They're
lucrando
just
de destruir el
consuming
planeta, ¿no?
the planet.
Y
And
bueno,
it's
es bastante
important because the
preocupante
Paris
porque
Agreement
el
always says
Acuerdo
that
de
we need
París
to
nos dice
limit
que
the
tenemos que
increase
limitar el
of
aumento de la temperatura a
uh,
1.5 y el año
the
pasado ya
temperature
lo
of the planet
consiguieron
in
y lo
1.5,
estamos
and we have
sintiendo
surpassed
y
that
es
last
impacto
year, and we are
justamente de
feeling
manera
it.
desproporcionada
We are
en
feeling
los
it in the
países más
most vulnerable
vulnerables, en los
places,
países
in
que
the
menos
countries who have the
responsabilidad
least
tienen sobre el
responsibility on
clima
this problem,
y
and
son
maybe
dentro de los países
in
los
the
únicos
onto the
que menos
least
aportan a todo este
liable
problema,
group of
¿no? Y
people
justamente
for this. So
están
we know support and we know
sin
resources
apoyo, sin recursos,
to we're
haciendo y
confronting a
afrontando
lot of
muchas
damages
pérdidas
and
humanas porque
losses
se les
that
está
are
nos
getting and
están
making their
dañando
lives
muchísimo la vida y
harder, and
muchas
sometimes it makes
ocasiones
them
trastornan al
migrate, and
migrar,
that's
como dices,
becoming
porque se
another
está
big
volviendo
problem
también el
because
otro gran problema,
climate
¿no?
change, it would
Que
affect
afecta el
everything:
cambio climático a todo,
economy,
la
life,
economía, la vida, seguridad
energetics,
económica, energética, alimentaria,
security,
todo. Así
all
que
types of
muchísimas gracias,
security. So
Martín,
thank you
por
for giving
darnos
us
este
this screenshot
pantallazo de la
of the
crisis
climate
climática,
crisis
de esta
from your perspective
perspectiva,
and with
de
your
toda tu
experience.
experiencia
And
también.
just trying to relate
Y
this
justo
topic,
enganchando este tema,
I would like to
quisiéramos
invite
invitar a
Julia
Julia
Herla from
de
Argentina, who's
Argentina,
going to
por
mention the
ejemplo, que nos va a
challenges of
hablar
climate
sobre
change,
los desafíos del financiamiento
recognizing another big
climático,
problem and another big
reconociendo otro
crisis that
gran
we are
problema y otra gran
confronting now,
crisis que
which is
estamos
the
hemos
endowment
enfrentado, que
problem,
es
which is
justamente el tema
something
del
that, as you know,
endeudamiento.
that has
Es un
been
tema que, como
working
saben,
around for
Latinoamérica
many
ha venido
years. And
trabajando
in the last
casi
3 years,
muchísimos
we've
años
been
y en los
trying to
últimos 3
relate
años hemos
this type
estado
of
un poco
problematic of
vinculando
debt,
estas
climate change,
problemáticas
and
de deuda,
extractivism.
crisis climática
So,
y también el
Julia,
extractivismo.
you have
Entonces,
15 minutes
Julia,
again for your
tienes 15
presentation.
minutos
And
también
if you
para
have
tu
any
presentación.
question, you can
Si tienen
start
preguntas, las pueden
tapping them
poner en
down
esta
in
mesita
this
de
little
preguntas
box,
y respuestas, o
or
si
if
no,
not, you
guárdenselas
can
para el
wait for the last
este
part of our
debate que vamos
meeting
a
where we
tener
will
después al
have a
final
space
y
for a
podrán
Q&A.
intervenir o dar sus
Mm,
comentarios o
that would be the right
consultas.
time to do it.
Así
Thank
que
you very
adelante,
much, and go
Julia, por
ahead,
favor.
Julia. Thank you very much,
Hola a
everyone.
todos y
Thank
a
you very much,
todas.
Carola, for
Muchas
the
gracias,
Spanish.
gracias
And
Carola
thank
por
you
el
very much for
espacio,
letting
gracias a
I
la
have the
verdad por
difficult
hacerme
task
la
of in
difícil tarea
15
de en
minutes
15 minutos
being able to
poder
untangle and
presentar
to
un
provide a
poquito,
bit more or
explicarle
provide a bit
de
more
una
dimension
cierta
or
capa de complejidad toda la
difficulty level
problemática que
to what
Martín
Martin already
describió
explained, which
perfectamente.
is the
La
climate crisis,
crisis es el
also
problema
related to the
de la
debt
deuda que estamos
crisis
enfrentando los
of
países del
global
sur
south
global.
countries are living.
Y
In
bueno,
my case,
particularmente en mi
I
caso
see really
me toca muy
closely
de
because of
cerca
the
por el
case that
paso que
Argentina is
atravesando
going through
Argentina
with the
actualmente
IMF.
con el
So
Fondo Monetario
I'll try
Internacional.
to, in
Así
a
que bueno,
first part,
voy a tratar
to contribute a bit
dar
more
una
onto the
parte
diagnosis, and in the
ir un poco
second
al
part,
diagnóstico y en
or
una
in a
segunda
way to try
parte, a mi
to
modo,
shed some
tratar de
light or
introducirle
try
luz,
to
tratar de
think about
pensar
horizons and
horizontes
or possible
¿no?
universes
en universos
of what are
posibles
we waiting
de
for
qué es
or
lo que
what are we
esperamos o
hoping
qué es lo que
for in
queremos
climate
para
change
un
or
financiamiento climático,
financing
un
for
financiamiento para la
eco-social
transición
transition or
ecosocial,
eco-fair that we
como nos
call
gusta
it.
llamarle desde FARC.
So
Así
let me
que
start with the
voy con la
presentation.
presentación. Me dicen si se ve correctamente. Eh,
Okay, so
bueno, en un
perfect. In the first
perfecto.
moment,
En un
as
primer momento,
I've mentioned before,
como les comenté, el
the
diagnóstico
complexity
de la
layer,
complejidad, ¿no? de
and it's not a
sumarle la
matter of
cuestión de la
adding
deuda,
up another layer
obviamente
of
es de
difficulty
importancia
like
vital para los
that is.
países,
And
los
this is
países del sur
something that
global.
global
Hoy
south
en día
countries in
actualmente
like
las
the five
economías en
economic
desarrollo tienen
development have
pagos
external debt
de
payments that
servicios de
are
deuda
surpassed
externa
20% of the
superiores
total
al
income.
20% de los ingresos
And
totales.
it is
Es
the
el mayor número de
highest
dos
amount
décadas,
in two decades,
lo que
which
muestra una
shows a
clara, ¿no?
clear
Lo que muestra una clara
crisis,
crisis de
debt
deuda
crisis that we are
que estamos
facing
enfrentando a nivel
at the global level. And
global
this
y que
carried
tiene
its
un
own direct
impacto
impact,
directo, acá quiero hacer
and
énfasis,
I would like to make an
en
emphasis
la
in the
prestación de
provision
servicios
of essential services,
esenciales,
including
incluye las políticas para
policies to
adaptarse,
adapt
mitigar y
and to
responder a los desafíos
face
crecientes que
the problems that
genera el
climate
cambio
change
climático y para, por
originates,
supuesto,
like
servicios
in
esenciales para la vida, como la
education,
educación
life,
y
livelihood,
la
or
salud.
health.
Según un
There's
informe
a recent
lanzado
report from the United
recientemente
Nations
de
from
Naciones Unidas,
2022
en
that says the public
2022,
debt
la deuda
worldwide achieved a
pública
record of
mundial
$92
alcanzó un récord de 92
billion
billones de
dollars,
dólares
and the countries in
y
development
los países
represent
en desarrollo
30% of that
representan el
total.
30%
So
de ese
added up
total.
to
Sumado, ¿no?
the
A
increasing
los
interest and
crecientes
overcharges
intereses y
that
sobrecargo, ¿no?
debts represent for global south
para los
countries.
países del sur
For
global,
example, Latin
que,
America
por
pays seven
ejemplo,
point or
América Latina
seven
paga
times more than,
7,7
for
veces
example,
más
Germany,
que, por ejemplo,
which
Alemania,
is one of the
uno de los países
most developed countries in
desarrollados de
the
la Unión
European
Europea.
Union. Meaning the
Es
Latin
decir, que
American
los países de
countries
América
are
Latina
paying
están
more
pagando
for
mucho
interest
más
and overcharges and
intereses y
fees than
sobrecargos
developed
que
countries.
los países desarrollados.
And
A
at the
su
same
vez,
time, Martin already explained it quite well.
América lo escribió muy bien, pero
This
esto
merges
contribuyó
onto
en un
poly
escenario de
crisis
poscrisis,
scenario.
en un escenario en donde vamos
We are going
hacia
towards a more
un
hostile
sistema
global
global
system where
mucho más hostil,
big
en
powers
donde las
are
grandes potencias
finding
se encuentran
themselves investing many of the
invirtiendo muchos de sus
resources
recursos
in
en la
the
industria
warfare
bélica.
industry.
Continúo. Claramente, como mencioné recién, estas altas cargas de deudas que enfrentan los países obturan,
This
¿no?
also occupies a
espacio
fiscal space
clave
to
para
carry
la
out social
realización de los
benefit,
ecosociales,
meaning
es decir,
it will
ocupa
clog
el espacio para que los
the
países puedan
capacity for countries
invertir,
to
puedan
invest
poner
money
dinero
in adaptation
en
and
políticas de
mitigation
adaptación y
policies facing
mitigación
climate change.
frente al cambio
And this
climático, y esto
clearly
claramente tiene
has a rebound effect.
un
It's
rebote
resonating
está
more and
generando cada
more
vez
in
más
different
fuerte esta
spaces,
preocupación en los
and
diferentes
it's putting
espacios y
us
está
at
poniendo
odds.
en juego, ¿no? De algún
We're
modo,
talking more and
está
more about
generando cada vez más una
reform,
reforma de la
international
arquitectura
reform. And
financiera
that
internacional
being
que, dicho
said,
sea de
this year
paso,
we're
también
becoming
se cumplen
80,
80
we're turning
años
80 years from
de
the
la
Bretton
creación de las
Woods
instituciones
creation
del
from the
Bretton
World
Woods,
Bank
del
and the
Fondo
IMF.
Mundial
Meaning
y
these
el
are
FMI.
worldwide
Es decir, esta
architecture has
arquitectura
been
mundial
able to
que
provide an
podía
answer
dar
to
respuesta
a polite
a
crisis
una
world,
policrisis
has been able to break down or take down decades
contra
of
de
debt
estancamiento de deuda.
and immobility.
Claramente
This is
ya es un hecho que
a
no,
fact. We won't be
no
able to
vamos
get
a llegar,
2030
¿no?, de cara a
with the
2030 a
Sustainable
cumplir
Development
con el
Goals
desarrollo
or comply.
sostenible.
And again,
Y
this is
aquí, de
important to
nuevo, me
highlight
parece importante
the
resaltar la
tangibility
tangibilidad
Sustainable Development Goals are. And when we
objetivos
talk
de
about
desarrollo
objectives of
sostenible, porque
sustainable
cuando hablamos
development,
de
we're talking
objetivos
about
de desarrollo sostenible estamos
the
hablando de
provision of education or health,
educación,
of
provisión de
access
salud,
to
acceso a
accessible
energía
energy,
asequible, así
affordable
que
energy. The countries in Latin
los
America
países de
are
América
more and
Latina
more
cada vez
committed
están más
and far
comprometidos y
from
lejos,
being
¿no?,
able
de
to
poder,
provide these basic
de
services
poder
for the
brindar los
development
servicios
of human
básicos
life.
para el desarrollo
And
humano.
in the
Y
core of
justamente
this
en el
financial
centro, ¿no?, de
system,
este sistema financiero
there's no
no
outlook
hay una
or
mirada
view or point of view from
socioambiental
climate
o justicia
justice. There's
climática,
not
hay
much
muy
about
poca
it.
representación, ¿no?, de organizaciones, de movimientos
We're talking
de
about
justicia climática y social, y en el centro claramente tenemos
ecological needs
comunidades
that are evolving.
ecológicas y
In the
distributivas.
next map,
En
we
el
see
siguiente
a
mapa se
situation
presenta la
where
situación
there's a
de la
current debt
situación de deuda actual,
context. And as we can
y
see
como podemos ver
clearly
muy claramente,
towards the global
hacia el
south,
sur global
we can see that there's
se
a
pinta una mancha
stronger
mucho más fuerte
figure, a
términos de
stronger
índices
color
rojos.
in reds.
Argentina
Argentina is in
está
a
en una
critical
situación
debt
muy
condition,
crítica
and
de
many other
deuda, y
Latin
muchos
American
otros
countries
países de la
are.
región latinoamericana también, pero bueno, países de
And
África
from
y
the
el sudeste
South
asiático
Asian
también, ¿no?
West are
Y
too.
ahora,
I'll
en
show
estos
you a
días,
video that has a
lo voy a
couple of
mostrar muy
years in the
cortito, de unos
making, but
años,
I
pero
like
me gusta
showing it because it
traerlo porque
shows
muestra esta
the
contraposición
counterpart in a
de
way
algún
of the
modo
global south.
de este sur global,
Facing that
al
crisis,
reconocer
well,
crisis de
as
deuda
Martin
detrás
mentioned,
de, como mencionó
the
Martín, las
main
principales
powers
potencias,
and the
el
so-called
llamado
global north,
norte global,
it's
se
painting
pinta,
itself in red,
se
we
pinta
can
de rojo,
say,
¿no?,
of
en términos
emissions, which
de
are
emisiones, es
the
decir, que
ones
son
that
los que más
more,
históricamente
the
han
most
contribuido a generar
or the
esta
have contributed the
catástrofe
most to this climate
climática
crisis and ecological
y
that we
ecológica
are submerged
en la que estamos
and
inmersos, y
sadly,
lamentablemente quienes pagamos
whom is
las
suffering the
consecuencias son
consequences are these
los
countries
países eh,
from the global south.
del sur
And
global.
of course, as
Y por
Martin mentioned,
supuesto, como mencionó Martín,
we don't have
el
an
sur
equal
global
global south, but
homogéneo,
also
sino
with
como también con territorios y
plants in
movimientos
motion that are
económicos
paying
global que están pagando las
the bill in
consecuencias.
a way. So this
Eso
has
sí,
been ongoing for some years,
unos
but it
años, pero
represents
representa las
CO2 emissions
emisiones de CO2
and
en la Tierra. Entonces, para
so in a
poder
way,
empezar de algún
to
modo
be able to
a
take
llevar
this
a estos espacios, ¿no?, de debate
spaces of
internacional, a estos
international
espacios
agreement where we can debate,
en
where
donde se
we
debate,
can
en donde está
show
justamente muy de manifiesto
the
la
debt
crisis de
crisis, and
deuda, ¿no?,
there's a
y hay
greater
una
push
crisis
from the
cada vez
civil
mayor de
society
parte
and
de la
from the
sociedad civil, de
different
parte de diferentes movimientos
movements
que
that we are a part
históricamente
of,
estamos,
and
¿no?,
that we
bregando
are
por
trying to
reformas
make a structural
estructurales.
change.
Me parece muy importante traer esta perspectiva, ¿no?,
We are
desde la
trying to make
ecología para poder
this
pensar la discusión en
financial
torno
or
a esta crisis
ecological
de deuda como
discussion into an
crisis
eco-social
ecosocial o
discussion to
ecológica.
cover more aspects. So in the core of the
En
theme,
el centro de
we
la
can
escena,
think about the
pensar
perspective
que
of
la
the
perspectiva de la
ecological
deuda
debt that
climática
was
nos
going
lleva a
to
poner en
put
el centro de la
in the
escena, como
core
vieron recién en los
of
gráficos, la
things the
responsabilidad
historical
histórica
responsibility that
de
northern
los países
countries
del
have
norte detrás de la deuda,
behind this
detrás de las crisis de deuda
debt crisis,
ecológicas
ecologically,
y climática. Entonces, claramente este
ecologically
concepto
speaking. So
entonces
this basically
alude
refers
a
to
las diferencias en
consumption,
términos de
to the
consumo, también
consumption of an
consumo de
industrialized
global
global north with a
industrializado,
higher
como
rates of
llamamos al tipo de
consumption, with a greater
consumo,
provision of
con una provisión
goods and
mayor de
assets
bienes y
and services in
servicios,
detriment
en
of
detrimento, ¿no?,
a global south
en
that's
detrimento del
impoverished
sur global
and
empobrecido, que
provides
necesita
more and
cada
more
vez
ecosystemic
mayores servicios
services, and
ecosistémicos, y
face
que
the
paga con
consequences
mayor
at a
fuerza las
highest
consecuencias
degree
actuales
that are related to
del
climate
cambio climático.
change.
Entonces, una
So this is a
pregunta
question that I think it's key
que me
and
parece
core to
central para
regenerate
traer
the
al
debate.
debate es
And we need to
realmente
really think about the link,
pensar,
the
¿no?, el
relation that we
vínculo
have
existente de
between
deuda
ecological
ecológica
debt
con la
and
deuda
financial debt and
financiera,
close and bring into
y
the
traer la
question
pregunta si
with the
realmente,
recognition
por
or the
ejemplo, el
statute.
crecimiento
These
de
are
estos
really the countries
recursos,
of the global
centralmente en
north,
países
of the
del norte
industrialized
global
global north,
industrializado, como
that are
mencioné,
the ones that are
en
in
realidad están en deuda
ecological debt with the global
ecológicamente
south,
con
but at the
el
same
sur global,
time
pero que a su vez
invest
se
more
invierten los roles y
in these
aparecen
roles and appear
financieramente
as financiers of our global south. And here I
Y
cannot
acá no puedo dejar de
overlook
referirme
the Argentinian context. As you
al
know,
contexto argentino, como
recently,
saben, recientemente ante el
in
ascenso,
the
¿no?
with
de
a
un
new
gobierno de
libertarian
derecha
government,
libertario,
right-wing government, we are
estamos
facing the
atravesando
different social
diferentes
movements
movimientos
and an
sociales. La política en general,
impoverishing, which
un
is huge
empobrecimiento tremendo y
in
un
material
deterioro en
conditions,
condiciones materiales
in detriment of
y en un detrimento
life
en condiciones
conditions, and we're not
de
even going to
vida, ni
mention
hablar
the effect
de las personas
that it
en
has
el
on people
territorio, ¿no?
in the
Poniéndole
fields
cuerpo
that are
a esta
basically facing
situación.
this situation.
Me gustaría
So
traer
I would like to
el
bring
caso,
in
¿no?
this
Para mostrar
conversation
que
and to make a
para
little
mí es
bit
un poco
tangible
tangible esto
this diagnose in a way and to make it
tal
more
vez
abstract.
más abstracto que hice en un primer momento.
As you can see in the
Como ven
first graphic,
en el primer gráfico,
in the
la
first
crisis
part of
de
the
deuda argentina,
Argentine
¿no?
debt
Como pueden ver,
in 2022,
en el 2022,
the percentage of debt
el porcentaje de
surpassed
deuda superaba
80%
el 80%
of our
el 80%
maybe
de nuestro PBI, cerca del
80%, and an
82%,
important part of that debt
y una parte
was
importante
with
de
the
esa
IMF,
deuda, que es
where
el
in
FMI,
2018
donde en
Argentina signed an
2018
agreement
Argentina
for
firmó un acuerdo por
45 or
45
$57
millones,
million
por
that
55
ended
millones
up
de
in a
dólares,
disbursement of $45
un
million,
desembolso de
and that
45
represented
millones de dólares,
127
que representó 127
times the
127
endowing
veces la
capacity of our
capacidad de
country,
endeudamiento
and
de
that
nuestro país,
currently
y que
ties
esto
us down
actualmente
to a
ata a una
negotiation
negociación
of over
de más
10
de 10
deals with the
años
International
con el Fondo
Monetary Fund
Monetario Internacional,
that has an
complicada de
array of
condicionalidades
conditions, and
y
it
seria, ¿no?
becomes a
Como un actor
political
de la política
actor
económica
in the
argentina.
Argentinian politics.
Eh,
So,
en la siguiente,
in the next slide, I try to make a
diapositiva trato de
comparison
hacer como una
between the
comparación, ¿no?
level of expenditures
Del
that we
nivel
have
de gastos que
in debt
tenemos en deuda
and
versus,
comparing it to the money that's allocated to
el
climate
dinero destinado a
financing.
financiamiento climático, la cual los números pueden sonar hasta
That
incluso
basically it
obscenos y
seems kind of
ridículos,
obscene and ridiculous,
pero ponen muy
it basically puts into the
de
limelight and
relieve,
into
ponen
the
muy
table
sobre la mesa,
for
sobre la discusión,
discussion the fact of where our resources
¿no?
going
Dónde se
to
están
in
yendo
this
los recursos
context of quality
en el
crises and
contexto de
multiple crises.
múltiples
As I've
crisis.
mentioned,
Hoy,
Argentina
como
is
mencioné, Argentina es
the
el
main
principal deudor del
endeavor of
organismo,
the organism with
administrando cerca
50%
del
of the
30%, ¿no?
money
del total
from IMF is
dinero
put on
de
in
los fondos partido
Argentina,
en
and it's a
Argentina,
really
y
important
es
player due to the
un
different
jugador muy importante por
conditionalities, different
las
financial and
condicionalidades
political
económicas
and
y
austerity
políticas de
conditions that are
austeridad
putting in Argentina,
que
but
pone cada vez
also and
más Argentina,
finally
pero
to
obviamente
all the rest of the
a
countries.
todos los demás
In
países.
2023, over
En
$20
2023,
million
más de 20
were used
millones
to pay
dólares se
debt
utilizaron para
services,
pagar servicios
of
de
which
deuda,
3
de lo
million
cual
represent
3 millones
interest and
representan
overcharges
intereses
from IMF
sobrecargos
Argentina.
del
And
FMI
according to the
Argentina,
current
y
scheme,
según el esquema
this
actual,
year our country will be
nuestro
facing
país va a afrontar
payments for around
va a afrontar pagos por cerca de
7 million,
7
over
millones,
$7 million.
más de 7 millones de
And
dólares.
again,
Y
another
acá de nuevo
important
un
piece of
dato
data is
muy
that
relevante que
almost half of it
casi la mitad, un poco menos
it
de la mitad,
represents interest and
representan intereses
overcharges. So this all
sobrecargos. Entonces esto
speaks for
ya
itself,
habla
and it shows
y
us
muestra, pone en
how
relieve
unequal,
las inequidades
ecological, and
políticas y productivas
distributive
que yacen en
our
el seno
reality
del
is in
sistema
the
financiero
international sector.
internacional.
While for
Mientras que para pagar esa
spares,
deuda, Argentina sigue
Argentina continues
utilizando
being an
modelos
extractive
activos, que son
model,
modelos
which are
de
industries that
producción
contribute at a greater
industriales que
scale
contribuyen en
to
mayor medida
the
a la emisión de carbono, ¿no? Y contribuyen en mayor medida al cambio
a
climático y
deepen and
profundizan un
extractive
perfil
profile and of
extractivo, un perfil de
rethinking of
reprimarización
our economy.
de nuestra economía.
In
En
2022, the
2022
fossil industry,
la industria
agro-industry,
fósil, la
represented
agroindustria,
almost
minería representaron
67%
más
of
del
the exports, meaning
67% de
that
las
to pay
exportaciones.
this
Es
debt,
decir, que para pagar esta deuda
there's
hay
a huge pressure on the
hay una
natural
presión
resources
enorme
and
sobre los
common
recursos
assets of
naturales,
the
sobre los bienes
country.
comunes del país,
And obviously, it would
justamente
move forward
sobre
after
avanza, ¿no?
extractivist models in
Modelos
Argentina,
extractivistas en Argentina,
while at the same time,
mientras que al mismo
the
tiempo
money and the
el
invested
dinero, los
resources
recursos invertidos
for
para
climate financing
financiamiento climático
represent
representan
$968 million in
968
comparison
millones de dólares, ¿no? En
to
comparación
debt
con
service
los pagos
payments.
de servicios
And
de deuda.
this money
Y
This
Este
financing
dinero,
was received
este financiamiento
at
recibió
90% in a
90%
loan,
en
which
forma de préstamos,
worsens the debt
justamente agravaba
crisis,
la
and
crisis
only
de deuda
10%
y
of it
solamente
as
10%
a donation.
en manera de donación. Y por último, estas categorías reflejan justamente
And finally, these categories reflect
la
the
abismal diferencia que
differences
existe entre el
into
financiamiento
mitigation and
para la mitigación
adaptation
y la
facing
adaptación
climate
frente al
change.
cambio,
So all this
climático.
in a
Todo esto en un
context
contexto, ¿no?
that leaves little to
que
no
deja muy
margin
poco margen
of
de
maneuvering to the
maniobra
southern
a los países del
countries,
sur global,
the
a la
global southern
economía,
countries, to
para
face
enfrentar
more
los
extreme
desafíos cada vez más
challenges of
extremos
climate
del
change.
cambio climático.
Currently, these
Actualmente,
are recent
las
news,
noticias son muy
but due to
recientes,
the new
pero
phenomenon
el
in South
fenómeno del
America and
Niño en
Argentina,
Sudamérica
particularly
y en
now,
Argentina en
the
particular,
triggers they were
dispararon, ¿no?
all the way
Hay
up
más casos de
because
dengue,
of
cada hay más incendios,
floods,
inundaciones,
and the heat waves that
las olas de
became more
calor se
frequent
volvieron
this
cada vez más frecuentes.
summer,
Este verano,
which is in a part of the
gran parte
Argentinian
del territorio argentino llegó a temperaturas
territory.
40
We got to
grados,
over
lo
40
cual
degrees,
pone más de
which
manifiesta la necesidad de
basically
respuestas
speaks by
urgentes, ¿no?
itself onto
Adecuadas,
the adapting that we need
financiamiento
to make
climático, financiamiento
to
para la
climate change and the
transición,
transition, and also thinking about
pensando, ¿no?
the climate dimension.
La dimensión climática.
And here, let
Y
me think
voy
about
a plantear
some
algunos
starting
puntos de
points to try
partida
and
para
think
tratar de
about
reforzar, obviamente,
these points, which I
estos puntos. Pretendo que sean
want them to
disparadores,
be
no pretendo
triggers. I
abordarlas
want them
de
to
manera cabal, ¿no?
look over the
Diferentes
different
posiciones
movements,
dentro de los movimientos
the social justice
socioambientales
movements, but I do
de
think
justicia climática, pero
that
sí me
it's
parece
important to talk about
desde ya
some
plantear algunos
points to think
puntos
about
para pensar
what type of
qué tipos
financing
de financiamiento,
do we want and in which
cómo
way
queremos, ¿no?
do we
dar
want
ese
this type of
financiamiento
climate financing,
financiamiento para
which
una transición
represent
ecosocial, una
ecosystemic
transición
allocation, which
energética
is
justa.
fair. And in
Y
first
ahí, en
place,
primer lugar,
we think that
me
it's
parece
relevant
muy
to
relevante
acknowledge
reconocer,
the
¿no?
different
Diferentes
contexts, as
contextos
I've
que uno tiene
mentioned, where
en los que
that
se produjeron
was
las deudas y las
obtained, and these structural injustices that
estructurales que
push
empujan a los
countries
países
of the global
del
south
sur global al
towards it.
extractivismo. Y
And
justamente no
precisely
podemos dejar de
here
decir que las
is where
bases
we see that
donde se
this
sustenta, ¿no?
international
la
finance
financiación
culture
internacional
established in the
y
international
el sistema
financial
financiero internacional
system is backed
se
up on
sustentan, ¿no? sobre pilares que son
asymmetric pillars,
asimétricos
and
y
they respond to colonial
responden y
changes and
neocoloniales y
anti-democratic culture,
antidemocráticas, es decir,
meaning that we already have
son
spaces where
espacios
there's
con
a
una
clear
clara
lack of
falta de representación
representation
de
of
movimientos,
movements, and even
incluso de
in
los países,
countries
¿no?
of the so-called global
del
south,
llamado sur global,
in
en los espacios de toma,
spaces where
de poder. Es muy importante, ¿no?
decision
cada vez
making is important, like in the case of
el
Argentina,
caso
which is really
Argentina
obscene,
es
but
muy
it
obsceno,
puts
¿no? Pero
in
pone muy de
manifest
manifiesto
the
el
increasing
creciente
resources
uso de
allocated
recursos
to
destinados al pago de
that
deuda y
payment and charges,
sobrecargos, ¿no?
confronting them
Frente
to the
a
needs
la
of our
necesidad
countries
de
on
nuestros
generating a
países
greater fiscal space
generar un
to
mayor
come
espacio
from public
fiscal para
policies of
ejecutar
human rights
políticas
and
públicas,
policies
políticas
of human
sociales,
rights. So in
políticas de
that
derechos
sense,
sociales. Entonces, en ese sentido,
we make a
llamamos
call out
urgentemente,
to
¿no? a
discuss
rediscutir los objetivos
overcharges
y intereses
that many
exclusivos, ¿no?
times
Que muchas veces imponen
will
estas
see
discusiones. El
us
financiamiento
confronting
climático, uno
this
de los
climate change
principales
as one of the pillars that
pilares
shouldn't
es
generate
generar
greater debt.
mayores deudas a nuestros países, ¿no? Porque claramente
Juliet,
obturan,
sí, ya
ya
se te va
voy
acabando el
cerrando.
tiempo, así que cerrando.
Bueno, gracias, Carola. Voy
Okay.
rápidamente. En segundo lugar,
Thank you,
tenemos
Carol.
que
I'm
ver, ¿no?
sorry.
Un enfoque integral que sea
I'll finish
participativo, democrático en el
quickly.
sistema financiero internacional para poder
We know
abordar
that
las
we need to
transiciones
have a
desde un
that
enfoque sólido de derechos
approach
humanos, justicia ambiental y perspectiva de género. Y acá un
to be
breve
able to
comentario, ¿no? De
confront
cara
this
al Día
and to
Internacional de la
take this
Mujer,
information to a new
el
space
8 de
like
marzo, ¿no?
the
Necesitamos más
Tribunal
voces
Women
de mujeres, de grupos vulnerados y
in March
desaventajados,
8th.
¿no? En estos espacios.
We hope
Pedimos, pregamos, ¿no? Cualquier discusión tiene que
that
partir
any
de una ley de
discussion should
deuda y
start
financiación climática nueva, adicional y adecuada, basada en subvenciones y que no y un
from trying
reconocimiento
to
de la deuda climática contraída por los
focus
países del
on
sur global
proper
en términos
climate change
unilaterales
actions
y justamente de
and
nuevo que no sean financiados
multilateral
integralmente
partners participate on
la carga de deuda para los países
precisely in that
para los
burden
países
that we would
atravesando
be mentioning.
graves crisis de deuda. En cuarto lugar, nos parece muy importante
is what make
la
us
transparencia, ¿no? Garantizar la
face this type
corrupción,
of
Julia, como mencioné
problems
recién, acceso a
in the
información y
transparency
involucración
dimension and
efectivamente
getting
a ciudadanos en la gobernanza
our
climática y la transición
citizens
climática.
involved
Y
for
por
the
último, bueno,
climate
un poco a
governance.
las corridas, los países del
So we
sur global no
shouldn't
deben
stop
dejar de
claiming
pagar por la
to
deuda
solve the historical
histórica
climate
generada
debt
por el
that's
software
been
impuesto al
generated
consumo
by
de los países del norte y las
this
responsabilidades
differentiated manner in the
diferenciadas
framework of our
por
actions
ahora en
and
la
in
convención.
of the
Así
convention.
que bueno,
So
seguimos
we're
el
just
debate
carrying on with our
luego,
debate. But
espero
I hope
haber
that
puesto
I
los puntos
brought you some
para continuar
interesting points
luego
so we can
la
continue with our
discusión. Muchas
discussion
gracias.
further. Thank you
Muchísimas
very much,
gracias, Julia,
Julia,
por
for
haber puesto
putting up
todos estos temas que
all
a
these
veces son
topics into
complejos
the
de
limelight,
entender,
but they
pero
are
realmente están
interrelated: debt,
interrelacionados, ¿no?
climate
La
crisis,
deuda, la
extractivism,
crisis climática
and
que estamos viviendo.
non-compliance of these
Y
northern
el
countries,
comportamiento de
which
estos
are the
países, además de
climatic
que son
and
los deudores
ecological
climáticos y
endeavors,
ecológicos,
and they assume
funcionan
the role of
también,
being the
asumen
ones that
este
are
rol
control
de ser quienes
the
controlan
multilateral
las organizaciones
financial
multilaterales financieras, ¿no? La
framework, and
Organización del
that
Financiero
makes it really
Internacional,
hard for us.
hacen que sea muy frustrante
And
porque hay
it makes
mucha
us see that
como
there's a lot of injustice in
injusticia
the
y que
neo-colonial
realmente un sistema
system, and that is a
neocolonial y este
vicious
es un
loop that's
círculo
putting
vicioso
our
en el que está solamente
country
poniendo a nuestros países cada vez
into a
más
more
apretados, más
adjusted
ajustados, más
situation, a really
complicados,
complex
en una
situation,
situación
and
muy
considering
compleja
everything that we
y
need.
considerando todo
We
lo
have
que
estimated like
necesitamos, se han
$5.8 billion
estimado como
as of
5,8
2030 that
billones de
countries
dólares
of
hasta
the global
2030 que
south
necesitan
need.
los países del
And
sur
we
global,
see how
¿no? Y vemos
the
cómo
in
en
reality
realidad la
that
deuda está
getting
alcanzando
really high
niveles
levels.
sumamente
We see how
altos,
climate
vemos cómo el
change is
financiamiento
not being
climático no se está
complied. We see that
cumpliendo y
it's
está llegando
affecting
como
that.
préstamos que aumentan la
So
deuda.
how do
Entonces,
we
¿cómo
make
hacemos?
in
¿Cómo
these
hacen
countries
nuestros
to
países para
generate this?
conseguir este dinero? Y
As
justo
we
Enrique también lo
mentioned,
mencionaba,
we've heard
este
this
dinero
one
se
is
está
going
yendo
towards
gran
a
parte a la
war,
guerra, ¿no?
and
Y
Enrique is
justamente de esto
going
nos va a
to
hablar también Enrique,
comment
de
on this.
entender un
He's
poco
going to be
estas
commenting on
crisis,
this
este contexto tan
complex
complejo.
situation. So let me
Y
invite Enrique Daza from
invito,
Colombia
por tanto, a Enrique
to
Daza de
comment a
Colombia
bit more
a
onto this other
comentarnos
topic, which is
ya
really
sobre este otro
important
tema que es tan
in
importante
this
también en el
international
contexto y en la coyuntura
context
internacional que
that
nos
is
afecta
affecting us
también de manera indirecta.
indirectly. Enrique is going to
Enrique
tell us
nos va a
about
comentar sobre el
the
estado de la guerra en
status in
Ucrania, los
Ukraine
escenarios que se abren en la
also,
disputa en
and
Occidente y
Enrique,
Oriente.
you have
Así que,
15
Enrique, por
minutes.
favor,
Thank you
tienes
very
15
much, and
minutos.
thank you for your
Muchísimas gracias. Y
presentation.
gracias, Julia, por la presentación.
When we talk
Cuando se
about
habla de la disputa entre
this
Oriente y Occidente,
situation of global crisis, I think that we shouldn't lose sight of some of the
pierden de vista
important
algunos
aspects.
aspectos importantes.
We can't say
No
that
solamente
strictly we have a global crisis.
lastimosamente haya una crisis global, lo que hay es una crisis
There's
del
if there's a
capitalismo
crisis of capitalism,
liderado por Estados
capitalism, but
Unidos
a crisis
y
of the
una crisis
approach
del enfoque
that this country
que este país
and the rest of the countries
y los demás
that
países
are
capitalistas
capitalistic
occidentales le han
wanted to
querido
give the
adjudicar a
organization
este
world
país.
world. It's not a
No es una crisis
crisis
destinada
that's
a nuestro
there. There's
país,
many other
ni
countries that are not in
mucho
the
menos
crisis,
es
but
una
rather it's
crisis, sino es
financial
una crisis de un modelo económico.
crisis. Where is
¿De
that
dónde
coming
surge
from?
ese
And that
hecho
looks
y cuál es el
like that's the
rol
topic of
de la
warfare
guerra
in
de la
this
guerra
context.
dentro de este contexto?
Overall
Es muy
speaking, we can
general
say
poder decir
that
que
all the world
desde la
architecture
arquitectura mundial
to the
surge
dissolution
a
of the
raíz de la
Soviet Union
disolución de la Unión
and
Soviética
in
y el surgimiento de
the
Estados Unidos
resolution of
como
US as the
prácticamente
hegemonic
la única superpotencia que estaba en condiciones
leadership into
de
trying to establish their
controlar e
own
imponer su
ideology, their own
su
economy,
ideología, su
and their approach,
economía,
politically
su
speaking.
enfoque político.
This
Esta
hegemony that
que
was
Estados
achieved by
Unidos
the
fue
US
logrando durante
2 or 3 decades ago,
2 o 3 décadas, es visible en hechos como
it
que
looks
Estados
like
Unidos es el
the
país
US is a
exportador
main
de armas,
seller of
es el
of
país que tiene un mayor gasto
arms,
militar,
of firearms.
que en este año puede ascender a
They are the
900
ones
mil
that
millones de
put
dólares, que
more
es
money
3 veces el
onto
gasto
military
militar
expenses, three
nacional,
times what China
10 veces el de la India,
spends, 10 times what
10 veces el de
India
Rusia.
spends, 10 times
Es
what
el
Russia
único
spends.
país que
It's the
tiene
only country that has military
bases
bases
militares
in the hundreds,
por centenares.
like
Tiene
750,
750 bases, mientras que Rusia tiene
and
11,
11 of
de las
them
cuales 11
are
son en su periferia cercana,
around
digamos, a la
this what used to be
vía
Soviet Union,
Rusia.
and China only
Y
has
China
three
solamente
bases.
tiene tres bases. Esa
This
hegemonía de Estados Unidos conseguida a partir
power
de
of the
la
US
guerra del
obtained in the
Golfo
90s is
se
reflected in the military
resume en un
expansionism
expansionismo militar que implicó una expansión de la
that
OTAN hacia el este
represented
y
the
un
expansion or
protagonismo en
spreading of
múltiples
NATO
guerras
to the
como
west,
pudieron
and that
ser
generated
indiscutiblemente la Primera Guerra del Golfo Pérsico, la
the
intervención en
first Gulf War, and
Bosnia-Herzegovina,
then
la
dismembering of
guerra, el
Yugoslavia, and the invasion of Afghanistan, the Iraq War, Libya, Syria, and finally Ukraine's war. So I admit so that we didn't stay in the middle of the activism, military activism with US, because the US picked up was where the golden age of their denomination or their globalization started decreasing into that golden age, and the US is now in a situation where they have a relative weight that's decreasing with a decrease of the dollar and a rising of other countries that still are challenging their global hegemony but under a development model. In that situation of achieving the loss of influence is that you are the launched in the last three governments or what they call the national security strategy. With national security strategy, make each government has been in the last 3 years of administration. In the case of the last government, if you can analyze all strategies, you'll find it. But their objective was to confront countries that the U.S. consider are an existential threat. Concretely, what this coincided that they need to confront powers that represent an authoritarian position with an exterior revisionist view. Revisionist for them is referred to those countries that are they need to question the providential design of the U.S. to basically decide the organization of the world. And given that there are some countries that consider this appointment is not something that should be taken away, and they consider that this revision based on that is that the U.S. launches a whole strategy of keeping through military means the hegemony, and from there is where the Ukrainian war comes into play. It's not two powers confronting each other. It's a product of the aggression of the U.S. of the attack NATO in the attempt of putting in Russia's border a military device that threatens the existence itself of Russia. In that sense, and in many of the speeches that are predominantly of everyone same or from each other, but it's not that. It's not. That's not the case. The threat of war is a product of the U.S. of trying to keep the power that they achieve or attain in the 19 responsibilities are not the same. Like, for example, the GDP of the US is quite large, it's like China, but the per capita of China is 3 or 4 times less than the US. They are between 50 and 55. The Russian one is between 55 and 1 and 55 first spots of GDP per capita. If you want to compare China with a big laboratory, it is true, but this is an analysis of what this greenhouse emissions per capita represents, which is less than the greenhouse emissions is from the US. So for a global vision, I believe that the crisis for the Western capitalism wants to bring drag everyone down in their own process, the capitalistic crisis to achieve and to keep and reinforce the architecture, international financial architecture, and the financial model that provokes or causes the catastrophe of these independent countries that are underdeveloped. So the crisis of Latin America is a product of having followed a model that comes from Washington and it's a crisis for our society, but it's a crisis also from those or from that that was both to us. This activism is not an option. No countries have freely chosen, but rather an option that has been imposed by an economical model that wanted to have Latin America inserted in the world as a prime matter, raw matter order, and that's what's in crisis right now. In that sense, why I think it's important to celebrate that or identify where the threat of war comes from the U.S. activism and to try to mold the world at their own shape. And that's what has provoked or caused this Red Sea confrontation, activism of Israel in the Middle East, the aggressions toward Iran. 99% of the world confrontations regionally and individual are due to the militarist position that the U.S. has, and for them, their wishes to keep their privileges. That's been changing gradually. I don't share this catastrophistic vision where we see that the world is going to end and we are going to face all this. Yeah, of course, there's some devices and there's some positive signs that are arising from a complicated situation. And as a positive signs, I will basically focus on the strengthening of the BRICS, the de-dollarization, and the fact that, anyways, in the middle of the climate catastrophe, there's many countries that have advanced importantly in the in the development of a whole infrastructure of renewable energies that have an undeniable level of importance. And that goes in contradiction with the oil industry and the multinationals, and they're not as visible either at the global level, but they are hidden between different figures to confront the crisis. And given that we are in a crisis, let's all think, right? Because there's no responsible party, an unavoidable thing, product of fortune almost, or physical nature of life. So I believe it's important to understand that whenever we do an analysis of a macro type, of a global micro type, it's important to point out that to understand what's happening, what's going on, and understanding what is the solution. That's why I believe that solutions are related to the development of financial architecture, which is different of a multipolarity of a world where we are not trying to impose one only model of capitalism, but we want to be or recognize that we live in a plural world where we have different cultures, different traditions, and different systems of development, which are political, social, and if we don't recognize that diversity, the US and the psychics in Europe are going to see how the livelihood and the ideology is going to be confronted with a greater resistance from the rest of the humanity. I believe that at this point there's a huge part of the humanity that's against that and has rejected the model and the globalization model and the democratic forces to take advantage of that opportunity to lead the change. Unfortunately, due to this historic circumstances, many of the changes have been taken advantage of by right wing forces, conservative forces, but this is a field of dispute when democratic right wing capable also lead a change within the progressive sector, but as a part of a change and achievement that we are trying to obtain. And just to finish off, I believe that militarism is also something that we need to put into relativity. This is something that China developed, and they have around 200, $300 billion in military expenditure. The US has way more inhabitants, or basically the US has the triple the budget that the budget, but we're talking also about China not having even a tenth of GDP economies of the US. So now we're talking about the accumulation, in which the US and the European Union have 250 years putting into or affecting the world with greenhouse emissions, and there's an environmental debt that's not that started just now or a few years ago, but rather historically we've been witness of these actions. And in that sense, it's not a matter of saying, okay, we are all responsible, we should all increase our emissions, but rather the way sustained environmental damage that Congress has established are related to the extractivism of the model of the last 100 years, and particularly the last 40 years. So I believe that this situation of activation of the US independently, the power is what driving us as a world to different and situations and problems that only it doesn't mean to deny what are the local contradictions and the regional problems. However, that will be like the conductor spread and the common denominator for the huge array of geopolitical problems at the global level. I believe that I ran out of time, so let me finish with that. Thank you very much, Enrique.
Muchísimas
Yeah,
gracias.
it's
Bien, muy
very nice to have
interesante realmente tener esta lectura.
outlook, and you
Y
start
vas
reaffirming
retomando
some of
también
the
algunos
topics and
temas,
how the
también
different
muestras
outlook
una
is
mirada un
of
poco
how
distinta
climate
también
crisis
de
is
cómo se
being
está viendo la crisis
lived from
climática desde tu óptica tal vez de una manera no tan
catastrophic outlook, or
catastrófica
like
como lo
maybe
vemos
some
tal
of
vez
us
algunos que somos más
environmentalists see.
ambientalistas y
We are
vemos
getting
que
to that
estamos llegando
point
a
of
ese
no
punto del no
return,
retorno,
and I
¿no?
think that
Pero
we
creo
have
que
some
coincidimos o ha habido
coincidences of
coincidencia en
aiming
las
towards
percepciones
the
justamente de
countries.
apuntar a los países, ¿no? Del norte, a apuntar a Estados Unidos, que de
And
hecho
we see that
está
the
en el
US is
ranking
in
de
the
los
ranking
deudores
of
climáticos y
the
ecológicos, está en la primera
different
posición. O
countries
sea, Estados Unidos
that
siempre ha sido
are
el país que más ha
the
emitido
most in debt,
históricamente,
because
que
they're
más
number
recursos
one. So
consume y
now
ahora
they are
también el
the
que más
ones
tensiones
generating,
políticas está
promoting the most
justamente promoviendo por
harsh
esto de
or
mantener su
difficult
hegemonía.
geopolitical
Yo
situation.
también
So
percibo que tal vez es
um,
un interés de
the
mantener su
armamentistic
economía, porque la
industry
industria
in the
armamentista
country
en
is
el país es
important, we
importante
understand.
también.
In the
Y obviamente todo
multilateral
este sistema
system,
multilateral,
from
tanto
the
financiero
financial
como el
system
de
in the
Naciones Unidas, está
United Nations
mostrando totalmente
being
insuficiente para
or not
poder
enough
frenar
to
estos
stop this
eventos, ¿no? En
event
un
where
momento
we
que es tan
should be
crítico para la humanidad, donde
prioritizing
deberíamos
the
estar
tension of
priorizando
climate
justo
change
la
and
atención
different
a la
other
crisis
crises
climática,
that
las otras
Martin
crisis
showed
que
us,
nos muestra el
because we
cambio
have
climático,
not
son 9
planetary
límites
limits and we have
planetarios y
already
hemos rebasado
surpassed
5,
5 for the
donde
Agenda
en
2030 that
2030
we are
Europa
really
nos queda muy poco
behind on,
tiempo y estamos
and we are
atrasados
dedicating to
y nos
this
estamos
warfare
dedicando
now.
a este tema de
So
las
it's
guerras y es
concerning,
realmente
frustrating,
preocupante, frustrante
and
y es realmente
something that's
un
really
tema
serious. And we
muy
need to
serio, ¿no?
understand that the
Y ver que Estados
US
Unidos
with a
con su
veto
poder de veto
power
puede
can
simplemente oponerse a que haya
be in the way of
pedido de paz, por
themselves
ejemplo,
in the
en lo que
way
está sucediendo en
of
Gaza,
peace.
nos
And
demuestra,
it
¿no? Que
shows us that the
el sistema
multilateral
multilateral,
system,
incluso el
even
de
in the
Naciones Unidas, es
places
bastante
unbalanced, unfair,
desequilibrado,
and
injusto, ¿no? Y
non-representative
no
of
representa,
people's
digamos, ahí
interests.
los intereses de las
And
personas, ¿no?
it's
Y
really
bueno, eso
sad.
es muy, muy
But
triste,
thank
una
you very
pena.
much, Enrique,
Pero
for
muchísimas gracias,
giving us
Enrique,
this
por brindarnos esta
presentation,
presentación también, tu mirada y
this
tu
outlook.
lectura.
Sadly, Martin had to
Lamentablemente,
disconnect, but
Martín se
she
ha
already
tenido que
shared his
desconectar, pero ya nos ha
presentation.
compartido su
I appreciate
presentación.
a lot of
Les agradezco
Martin,
muchísimo
Julia,
y
and Enrique for
Julia
your
y Enrique por
presentation that
las
you've given us.
presentaciones que
They
nos
have
han
been
dado.
really
Han
interesting
sido realmente
with a lot of
interesantes y
information
con
and data.
muchísima información
And
que
we will
soportarnos.
now go
Y vamos a
to
pasar ahora a la
the
ronda de
comments to
comentarios
complement or to
para
probably
comentar, ¿no?
give us
Comentar
another
otras
outlook
miradas
to
también
countries in
desde otros
perspective. So
países,
let
desde
me
otras
open the mic to
perspectivas.
Tatiana
Le doy ahora la
Oliveira.
palabra a
So they
Tatiana Oliveira,
can give us
para que ella nos dé
an
también la
outlook
lectura
on social
del
movement and
tema de los
climate change.
movimientos
Tatiana,
sociales y
you're
el cambio
going to have
climático.
8 minutes.
Tatiana, vas a tener, por
And
favor,
let's
8
be careful
minutos
with
y te pido, por favor,
time
que te
so we can
organices
also
con el
have
tiempo
a
para que podamos tener también una
Q&A round
ronda
at the
de
end of the
preguntas y
interventions that
respuestas
you
e intervenciones
please go
pertinentes.
ahead.
Adelante, por favor.
Thank you, Carola.
Obrigada, Carola. Antes de começar, eu queria
I will be
dizer
speaking in
que, bom, eu vou falar em
Portuguese
português,
Thank you,
já
since
que
Carola. I would let you
uh,
know that I'll be
de
speaking
maneira
most
in
of the
paranaense
Portuguese because
interventions were
the
made
panel
in
was
Spanish.
greatly
So
majority in
we
Spanish. So
want to
let's go
listen, our
to
fellow Latin
another Latin American
Americans. It's
actor
very
so we
important
can
for a
understand this
regional
integration
integration process,
as
as
it is,
Natalie
as
said.
Natalie mentioned.
If you allow
If
me,
you
I
allow me,
will comment
I'll make a comment
on
about
the relationship
the
between social
relation
movements
of social
and climate
movement
negotiations,
between
international
climate change,
climate
nationally
debates. And I would
speaking.
like to go
And I
back to
wanted
some
to go
issues
back
which I
to the
feel
points that
are
I believe are
important that
most
were pointed
important
out
to the
in the previous
presentations that were made,
presentations, considering that
considering
I
that
am
I'm in that
in this
position.
place, which is apparently in Zoom, I've
Zoom
been asked
here
to confirm the
is asking
language
me
I'm
to
speaking. Should
confirm
I
my language.
change? No, it's
We are
okay.
listening.
No,
We're
estamos
Can you come
listening
into the
in
estamos
the
Spanish channel
Spanish
haciendo la
channel in
in
the
the
interpretación y
translations.
interpretation
la
So we're
tool? You
traducción
listening
can
to
see
the
that
y la
translation
traducción directamente.
directly.
you can
Así que
hear
no,
it
no
in Spanish. So
funciona
just
la
ignore that
traducción
message.
interpretación.
So I'm in
So,
this
taking
place right
advantage
now
of
in
the
which I can
situation
make
of being a
comments. So I'd
speaker, I
like to
wanted to
go
relate
back
this
and
event that
mention a few issues which were
arose from previous
which
panels
were previously
related to the
mentioned and
relation
speak
between
about the
social
relationship
movements,
between
civil
social
society,
movements,
and the
civil
debate,
society, and
the
climate debate.
international
I believe
climate
the
debate,
first thing
which
that
was the
was
first
said, and
part
it's
that was
really
mentioned,
important,
and that's really
is really
important
trying to pinpoint the
to
moment in
localize
time
the momentum where
of
the
the
international
international
climate
climate
debate and
debate
that
in this
of quality
background,
crisis,
against this
because
background
that has
crisis,
been
because this has been
fundamental
fundamental to inform this debate and
to establish a
especially
rhythm of the debate,
crucial to the connection
especially in the
between
connection
economy and
between
climate, or
economy and
economy
climate,
and
or
environment.
economy and
And it's also
environment.
very important to call your
Also, it's important to
attention
call the
to,
attention
in
to the
this
fact that in
context
this
of
context of
crisis, we're also
quality
going through a
crises,
moment in which multilateralism is also
we have
undergoing
a
a crisis in several
multilateralism
levels,
crisis, which
either
is
in
different from
regional
the point of view of the
integration
regional
or in
integration, like that
terms
mentioned,
of
being from the point
the
of view of
regimes,
the regimes itself,
uh, political regimes and
the
consultation,
consultation
negotiation between
or agreement of international
international
regimes
political climates.
where climate
Climate
is
action is
outside
not
of that
outside
scenario,
this global scenario. And in
which is more global.
Brazil,
It's
we
not
are
just because that in
currently
Brazil
this year
we are
hosting the
receiving
G20 meeting,
in
and
this
two of
year
the main
with the
agendas
agendas of
for this
2020
G20
and the main ones
meeting will be actually a
which has to
debate, a
do with
discussion on
debate
reforming
about the
global
reform
governance and
of global governance
reforming
and the reform of the
financial
financial
global architecture.
architecture,
Now, all
which
of
is
this
also
is
global.
not, as I said,
And
uh,
that's not
small
little
if
if you
we take the
consider
standpoint
that
that
the climate
climate
debate
debate, it has been heading towards
it's
a
now
connection,
in a
or let's
path
say a
of
convergence,
convergence
as in
to
terms of the
transformations of the
transformations of
economy
economy, the
and of
ways
the
in
orders of
which
accumulation
accumulation
when we
happens
deal with
at a certain
capitalism.
point in time in
When we
capitalism,
see
in
the
which we are
advance
seeing the
of
finance,
financing methods
life,
of the economy of
economy,
life
and
and
nature
of nature,
being transitioned towards a
then we can make a
financing
relation
regime.
with the
Now, in
climate
terms
global
of a
regime.
global
And what we
climate
see there
debate, what we are considering
and
from this
thinking
point of
about
view
this
of the crisis in the
multilateralism crisis,
multilateral background,
it was a
we see that
negotiation process that
negotiation is
was
becoming
harder
harder,
with
in
periods
which
of problems
standpoints
that
last
were
even
longer and
longer. That is,
longer,
things are
with a
becoming
greater
harder and
difficulty,
harder.
with a higher
It's being very difficult
problem or
to reach
difficulty
any
to
type of
achieve
agreements.
agreements.
If any of you paid attention or were there during COP28 in Dubai, you will
With
remember that
COP18,
even
that went down in
in
Dubai was
spite of the
established that
beginning of the
uh,
conference, in which the general
well,
feeling was
basically
that
when we
things would progress
saw the
very
beginning of the
quickly,
conference, we
because
saw
in
that
the
things were
first
going to
plenary
happen really
meeting
quickly.
of
But after the first
countries,
plenary,
the
there was an announcement for the
fund for
initiation of
losses and
gathering of
damages
funds, and after that,
fund
negotiation
gathering
lost
was
track.
announced.
In
But
at the
in
second
the
week,
second
we
week,
had a
we
period
reached
of
a
a long
stalling that lasted
impasse
almost through
where
the very
we
end of the
where we took
meeting.
it to the last day of the negotiation. That caused the negotiation to be
So
extended for
negotiations
over one
lasted
for over a
one day
day.
longer than we thought. Now,
So,
as a
as a
consequence of
reflection
this
of the
crisis of
multilateral crisis,
multilateralism, we
we
come
have
to
now
a
this
heightened
greater difficulty of
difficulty in
coordination and
reaching
action between the
coordinated
countries.
action between
Going
countries.
back
Now,
to
going back to what I said before,
this
this
characteristics of polar crisis,
characteristics, this
that same
problem of
difficulty of
reaching
concertation of actions
a
between countries
concerted action
was
between
observed
countries was
during
also
COVID-19
seen
crisis
during the height
in
of
the
the
most early point in
2019
2020,
COVID crisis,
2021.
and which reached its
And
very
where
pinnacle in
multilateralism
2020,
crisis had
2021.
a
Now,
really
the crisis in
harsh consequence, which
multilateralism
was
had
the
severe
difficulty of getting
consequences that
vaccines
reflected on the difficulty we had
in an equal
in
manner to
having the
everyone.
vaccines reach the places they were supposed to reach
And for the different countries
all
of the
throughout the
world,
world.
from the
From
point
the
of view
point
of
of
a
view of
climate
climate
negotiation,
negotiations, we
we also
also see
see
that this problem
that
in
these
reaching
difficulties
agreements and
of agreement,
concertations
of
uh,
positioning
due
countries,
to
has
the
generated
entrenched positions that countries have
some
taken,
questionings
has
regarding
also
democracy,
engendered questionings
regarding
as regards
transparency
democracy
of
and questioning as regards
process, even
transparency and
legitimacy of processes,
legitimacy of
which
processes.
is
Now,
something
this is a
really
really
far
serious issue. And
beyond the spreading
also
out of
the
the
uh,
negotiation methods and spread the
expands the
agendas.
expansion
There's
of
a
the
different
number
characteristic of
of
negotiation,
negotiation
and
agendas, the
that's
pressure
also the
that's being
methodology
made
that we need to
to
try and
try and
accelerate
force down
path
methodologies. We try to speed up decision
for this
making
climate
due
impulse.
to this
And this
still
will be
to
transferred
this
in a process of a conversations,
impasse that has been
negotiation of these
reached. And
negotiators,
now
and
the
for
problem
these
also of
ministerial
the
decisions.
issue that ministerial decision making holds back negotiators. And so this gives us an overall
So we can
feeling
call
of
it an
something that was
interruption
interrupted,
or low
or the
effectiveness in the process
negotiations
of
were not
negotiation
effective in
on
themselves.
themselves.
Now, the third
So
issue,
I
which
believe
was
that the
pointed
third
out
point
by Martin,
that was
is
really
the
reinforced with
relationship
Martin
between
is the relation
governments
between
and
the
private companies.
government
Now, in
or
this
the
sense, it would be
yeah in
important to
companies.
point out
So
that
it's
when we
important to mention that
consider
when we think
international
about the
climate
international
regimes,
climatic
the
regime
role, or even better, the relationship between governments and private
and the
companies
relation of the
is
government with the
very
companies
evident,
is not
not
only
only
shown
through,
through this appointments
for
that we have,
example, naming
like COPs,
presidency of
chairmanship
events such as the
for
COP
great leaders of
being given to
corporations, global
CEOs of
corporations, but
multinational
also because of the
corporations,
fact
and
that
also by the fact that
governments
governments have
have
brought into these top settings
taken
civil
this
servants that
from
at
public
the end
servants
of
and
the
they've
day
gained the strength
reinforce and
where
use
there's
that space for
businesses with these companies
business, striking
during the
business deals with
negotiation in the COP,
private companies, and they
and they even
even
participate
take part of these events
of
and these
events
agendas
and
that
agendas that
are
are
suggested by
proposed
these
by
private
companies.
companies. So
So,
overall,
in a
the
general
COP
manner,
has
COP
become
has
a place
became
where business
business based,
negotiations happen, and it has
and this
encompassed
relation
this very
involved
intricate relationship between
more key
governments
parts of the
and
state.
companies.
And Martin
Martin
mentioned
mentioned
IATA
IATA. During
during
COP28, IATA
COP28,
had
where
a
they
whole
had a whole
building
sector,
in which a
a
series
trailer
of
where they
events
organized a
that
series of
were
events that
actually
were
happening
competing with the
concurrently to the
negotiations agenda
negotiations
that had the
agenda, and
participation
several
of many
representatives of
representatives
governments, civil servants, actually ended up attending
from
these
public
events and not
officials
the
that
other
participated
negotiations.
of
Now, I
public
do
events.
think
So
this is an
I think
issue
that this
we
is
must
something that makes us
also
think
discuss
in
as it
regards of
pertains to where the
the
international
international negotiator role.
negotiation is headed towards. Because if we look at all of these
If we
elements
put together all
together,
of
the
these
crisis in
elements, the multilateralism,
multilateralism, the
crisis, the crisis,
multi-crisis, the
relation of
relationship between governments and
government and
private
companies,
companies,
I believe it's
and
important to also think
also
about
we
the
must
ways that
also think
we
of changes
think
in
governance, in governance,
international governance
internationally
and
speaking.
governments,
That is going
which have,
to
uh, in a
fit,
certain
or is
sense,
going to
um,
be
uh,
trying
try to
to
adapt to flexible
fit,
private
again, like I
governance
said,
systems that are
the
market
market and the
based.
needs of the market.
When
When we
we're
talk
speaking
about the
about
fake
causes
or
and
false solutions of
solutions in
nature, when we
nature,
talk
when we're
about
speaking about
carbon market,
carbon markets,
we're
we're
talking about
speaking
the
of the
introduction in the
introduction
national policy
of
by
things
influence
in
of an international
domestic
debate
policies through the influence of international debates,
of
the
market
introduction of
instruments that
market
make it possible this flexible
instruments that allow
governance
for this flexibilization of
of the climate
the
agenda.
climate
So
agenda.
clearly, there's
We
a
say it is flexibilized because
flexible
we
governance because
are
obviously we are
moving
coming out
away
of
from
a
a regime where the
responsible
governments are
regime
responsible
by
for
the
monitoring
monitoring
and
of
control,
control,
and
and we now
moving
go
towards a
to
moment
a
where governments are
participation
acting
of the
uh,
government closer to the
with
market and the
ties
market
to the market,
regulating
where the
the
market
economical
regulates the
agents in
action
a
of economic agents
general
as a
way.
whole. So the
So
market
the
exerts
market
influence
enacting
on
on the energetic
energetic transition or
transition or not,
non-transition
and
prices,
establishing
determining whether
the
companies will
companies are
invest or
going
not
to
in new
invest in new
technologies to
technologies
try to mitigate problems, clean up
for
their
energetic
energy
matrices.
matrices.
Tatiana,
I'm sorry
perdón que te corte, pero sí
to
estamos
stop
ahora
you,
sí
but
sobre el
we've
límite del
reached a
tiempo.
time
Así
limit.
que ya
Sorry, we are in the
So
limit of
just
brink of
a
time.
okay,
Okay, that's
just
fine. So
one word
just
on the
one more
issue
thing
of social movements,
about
civil
social
society.
movement and
What I
civil
would like to
society, because
say
what I
on
wanted to
that
say on
is,
top about that
against this
is that in this
backdrop,
general context,
I think
I
we should
believe that it's worth
mention
mentioning that we also
there
have
is also
a
a
transformative matrix in the way
ongoing
that
transformation
we enact with
on
civil society
how
and the social
civil
movement.
society and civil movements act. Whether,
So it's true
if
that
on
many
one hand, it
collectives
is
and
true that several
organizations, social
collectives and
movements
organizations
have
have
remained critical and
maintained a
resistant
stance
to this logic,
of
and it's
critical
possible not
discussion,
possible to ignore
we
the
should not
reality in the
ignore
political,
the
financial power of different social groups.
position of other groups who take part of a professionalized,
Of
let's
a more
say,
environmentalistic
environmental
approach
movement, who have
and more professional that's
been
established
placed
as
as direct
middle ground of the
negotiators
governments and
between governments
companies and of
and
mediators of
private companies, as
relations
mediators
of these
between
stakeholders with
these
the society
relationships and society, and
and with companies.
therefore I think we should
So I
ask
believe that it's worth mentioning
what will happen to
what's going to
democracy
happen with
when, against this
democracy when
backdrop,
you see
when
this
citizens
general
become
landscape
stakeholders or interested parties, that is,
with
market
a
agents,
interested
and
parties or
the
stakeholders
government
or and
invests
the
very
government invests quite a
strongly
lot in this
in
entrepreneurial world.
private companies. I'm so sorry.
Tatiana, ahora sí, disculpas, voy a tener que cortarte, pero muchas gracias por todas tus apreciaciones, por haber rescatado y analizado todos los temas que se han ido poniendo
Thank you very
en la
much.
mesa de
I'm sorry I'm
discusión.
going to cut you
Y
down.
en honor a
Just
tiempo, le
to
voy a
honor
dar la
time,
palabra a
I'll open the mic
Claudia,
to Glad
Claudia
Tamayo from
Tamayo de
IPC
Colombia,
Colombia.
por
So
favor, para que
she
nos
can give
hable
us an
también
8 minute
desde
outlook
dado nuestro
in
comentario de
the
8 minutos,
criminal
el
economics in the
papel de
current
las
context.
economías
To
criminales en el
limit
actual
also
contexto,
to
para
frame the
entender también un
debate.
poquito más
Please,
esta
Claudia, go
temática.
ahead.
Adelante,
Good
Claudia.
afternoon, Caroline. Good
Buenas
afternoon,
tardes, Carola, y buenas
of
tardes a
everyone
todos los que nos escuchan
that's
y
joining us
a la
in the
linda
Latin
por
America's
abrir este
important
espacio tan
space.
importante.
I'll talk
Me voy a
about
referir
this
como a unos comentarios
in
sobre,
relation of some of the comments that
primero, lo
Martin
que dice
shared,
Martín,
because
desde con lo
with
que
what the
se
war is financed with,
financia la guerra,
we could
se
finance climate
podría
change too.
financiar el
That's
cambio climático. Eso es
our premise.
una primera
And the
premisa.
second
La
thing is what
otra
Julia
es
mentioned
lo que
about
nos decía Julia
that relation
de
between
esa relación entre
financial
deuda
debt and
ecológica
financial
y versus
or
deuda financiera
ecological debt and financial
y
debt
el contexto de
in the
injusticias
context or
que
the
llevan a
understanding
gran
of
cantidad justice that make people live a extractivistic activity, like in the case of gold use and mercury, with in great part endangering their health. So what we heard or what Enrique Daza mentioned about the controversy of crisis, a general crisis, on putting it up as a more capitalistic crisis. On the part of criminal markets, we will have to say that the criminal markets take advantage of this vulnerability and the fragility. And we can say that everything that's a difficult context of individuals to make or to take advantage of it. Out of these five markets, there's an entity that's called the Global Initiative Against Organized International Crime, HITOC, that classified in 2021 10 criminal markets, and in 2023 it was classified in 15. And they made an index of markets and criminal activities that are most profitable, more dangerous for humanity. Of all these markets, at least five have to do with climate change and warfare. These are the firearms market, people, well, human trafficking, and the nature where the fauna and wildlife is, and the non-renewable resources. And in this last few, we have illegal mining and the oil muggery or oil theft in the most important markets. These are markets, or we have markets that are useful to other markets, like the market for financial crimes, the market of cybernetic crime, and the arms market, and another market that of extortion and security payment. In the ranking of these crimes, human trafficking is in fourth place. It's estimated that for 2022, refugees and international displaced in the world, the Office Against Drugs and an office of the U.S. estimates that two main routes of trafficking from Africa to Europe and Mexico, and all the population from South America and North America comes through, and it generates $6 billion annual dollars, and many of them with criminals and for organized crime that use this type of traffic. The migrant population is exposed to lots of vulnerabilities, and it has to do with recruiting, violence, gender violence as a generalized problem, extortion, and theft. We've even studied that people that don't have money to pay will be offered to pass loaded with drugs. It is a strategy about how criminality uses that as a strategy to use that as a business. Doctors Without Borders responded to 500 women and men who were victims of sexual violence in this Darien territory from Colombia to Canada, to Panama, I'm sorry. And there's a criminality here where we have these Mexican bands in Colombia, organized bands, and crimes against nature for 2021. We've estimated that the wildlife committed was between 20,000 and 40,000 years per year, according to the Ministry of Environment of Colombia. And the oil theft, because it's considered a hydrocarbon theft, is one of the most stolen products. Assets of $33 million. So oil theft, it also generates environmental harm and damage into nature as well. In regards to illegal mining, we estimate that 40 million people, majority poor people, work off of artisanal mining in a small scale. Illegal mining represents approximately 20% of the worldwide production of gold, diamond, pentallate, and 80% of precious stones. These activities are related to conflict, supply chain, and war supply chain supplies. The UN estimates that 4.5 million women and 600 children of over 70 countries to use mercury in these illegal activities. Considering this as one of the greatest pollution methods, with this toxin that not only affect waters in the planet but also the health of people. TikTok classifies this or a group of criminals as mafia group, criminal networks, criminal actors, stakeholders, and private stakeholders. We analyzed in Colombia is that these actors or stakeholders constitute a whole array, which is structural, where government stakeholders and private stakeholders can benefit, or and even in our case in Colombia, the stakeholders are those that have promoted criminal organizations to sustain their businesses and to back up their postures and the positions of power. It's important for Latin America and Caribbean to make a difference between everything that this um, gathering of power and how these economies, not illegal economies, but how these criminal economies connect. Because the relation is really porous of only legality in criminal economy, because in many legal economies are also criminal economies. For example, everything that has to do with weapons. To deepen this relation is really important, especially to give a better look at how economies are put together and what is the impact or how drug trafficking, human trafficking, and extortion models affected and protection payments. And just to finish off, it seems like while the capitalistic economy is crumbling and we are losing and we are feeling inflation and so on, whoever progressed are the criminal economies. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, beloved
Muchas
Claudia,
gracias a ti, querida
for
Claudia,
putting
por
all these
ver también
topics in
todos
the
estos
region
temas que
into
son
the
muy
limelight
importantes
and
en la
that
región
also deepen
y
this
que también
conflict and these
profundizan estos
problems.
conflictos,
I'm
esta
going to open the
problemática.
mic to Ida
Le voy a dar
Garcia
la
Naranjo
palabra
from
ahora a
Peru.
Aida
She's
García
going to tell
Naranjo de
us a bit
Perú, que
about
nos va a
what's
hablar de
coming
lo
in
que se viene en el
2024
año
and what she's
2024
called
en lo que ha
between
derivado
urns and
contra las
arms.
urnas y las armas.
Please, Aida,
Adelante,
you
por
have a
favor.
minute.
Aida, tienes
Yeah,
el
sure thing.
Claro que
Thank you very
sí,
much. Good
muchísimas
afternoon,
gracias. Muy
everyone.
buenas tardes a todas,
It's a real
saludos a
pleasure.
todos.
I hope
Es
that
un
we could
gusto, ojalá se pudiera
greet everyone
saludarme uno a uno,
individually, but I would
pero
like to
quisiera
refer to
referirme a
Natalie's
la
introduction.
introducción que hizo Natalie.
Aida, I don't know if it's me, but
Aida,
I
no sé si
lost
soy
your
yo, te
audio there.
perdí el audio. No sé si escuchan, Omar.
We are entrapped in these
Estamos
wars,
atrapados en las
and of
guerras
course, we
y
need to
por
look at
supuesto que tenemos que
wars
mirar
and
las
elections
guerras y
because
las
we
elecciones
are
porque
facing
estamos ante
a moment
un
of
momento de cambio de la
change for
geopolítica
geopolitics in the world,
mundial, de
of
la
global
geopolítica
geopolitics, and
global y
obviously, based
efectivamente
on this
en
election,
base también a
we
las
will have a
elecciones
new
se va a
political map.
producir un nuevo mapa
And that's
político,
what
¿no?
Natalie
De
was talking
eso
about when
introducía
we are
Natalie en el
talking
tema
about
de
the
atrapados en
drug
las guerras.
between wars.
Luego,
Now,
las
the
grandes
geography of
potencias
it
y la
as
nueva
well. We are facing
geografía.
a new geography.
Estamos
That's
ante
why
una nueva
we are
geografía, por lo tanto,
considering it to
militar
be
y
military and
económica,
financial because
porque
we're talking
vamos a
about the
hablar
war and
de la
its relation
guerra
with
y su
economy.
vínculo con la
And of course,
economía.
we do
Por
require
supuesto que
to
se
have
requiere de
integration
salida de
outlets
inmigración,
like what
como
are the
no, hablaremos de
possibilities
ello de cuáles son sus
and
posibilidades
it's important
y
to
muy
receive
interesante
inputs
todos los
from
aportes
the
sobre el
climate
tema climático,
point of view,
mucho más
especially for those that are not
para los que
experts
no
in that
somos expertos en ese
aspect,
tema
and with
y que cada
that
vez con
next
la actividad
activity,
de Latindar nos
get a lot
educamos
more
muchísimo
knowledge.
más.
I would say that
Yo
this year
creo
is
que
a
este
year that
año
we
es
are
un
in
año en
between
que estamos
boats
entre
and
los
wars,
votos
between
y las
urns and
guerras, entre
arms.
las urnas y las armas.
Meaning the
Es
world
decir,
is going
el
to
mundo
defeat a
batirá
world
un
breaker
récord
of attending
mundial
to
y
the urns this
asistir a
year.
las urnas este año.
4,100,000
4
people,
millones
uh,
100.000 personas, 4.100
4.1
millones de
million
personas
people
en el
will go to
mundo
vote,
irán
and
a
that's
votar
going to
y por lo
change the
tanto
geopolitical
cambiará el
map.
mapa
These
geopolítico
4,000,000
mundial.
people,
Esas 4 millones,
4 billion means
4.100 millones, perdón
represent
ustedes,
over
representan
52%
más
of
del
the world population.
52% de la
This
población
is an
mundial.
historical
Este
record.
récord es
It's not
histórico,
that has been
no es
agreed
que haya
upon,
sido
it's just a
concertado, sino que
coincidence
son
to have this
coincidentes estas
selection.
elecciones en el
We've
tiempo.
talked today about
Se ha
the
hablado
most
hoy día
important
efectivamente
country.
de los países más
In the
importantes
world, we
y
have
tenemos
right
en el
now
mundo pues en
over
estos momentos
uh,
más de
8 billion,
8.800 millones de
880
personas.
billion people,
Eso es lo que
and we have
tenemos, de los cuales
49.5 people
el
are women, and there's
49.5 son mujeres.
countries
Hay
that have
países con
a lot
muchos
less.
nietos que están
China
en la
has
disputa global. China
18.5% of the
tiene el
population, and the
18.5% de
US
la
has
población y
4% of the
Estados Unidos tiene
population.
el
For us
4%
to
de la
measure
población.
a range,
Para que midamos en un
how
rango
important
la
populational weight
importancia de los
is,
pesos
and of
poblacionales
course, of
y por
populations, it's
supuesto de las
important.
elecciones.
We have important
¿Hay
processes,
importantes
yes, of course.
procesos? Sí.
We have
Tenemos
important
que decir que
processes,
importantes
and those are the
procesos
ones that have been
son los que
taking
se
place
vienen
in different
dando en
places. In 74
diferentes.
countries, we will come into
74
national elections.
países entrarán a elecciones
There's people that
nacionales.
mentioned that there would
Hay
be
quienes hablan
85
de que este año habrán
elections.
85
Of course,
elecciones.
there were
Efectivamente, las
85
habrá,
take place,
pero
but
solo
24 of
74
them are
serán de
going to be
orden
national,
nacional.
nationwide.
Las
The other
otras
ones are
serán
going
de
to be
orden
municipal or regional.
regional o
Some of them are
municipal.
really important,
Algunas de
yes.
ellas son
The
muy
most important
importantes,
of
sí.
all
La
in the
más
case of Latin
importante de
America and
todas
in
en
the
el
world,
caso de
because you
América
can
Latina y del mundo, por supuesto,
worldwide, it's of
es la de
Brazil.
Brasil.
We will have
Asisten a
5,000
votar
municipalities.
5.000 municipios.
And
Eso
it's
es
a
Brasil.
great important
De ahí
way
el
because
peso
if it's
político
true,
porque
Lula
si bien es cierto,
returned in
Lula
January
cumplió en
1
enero
year of
un
the
año de su
administration, it
mandato,
will
será un
serve as a
temperamento
measurement
para
of
medir
Lula's
efectivamente el propio
administration so
mandato de
far.
Lula, ¿no?
That's important
Hay otros
processes
procesos muy
ongoing in India with
importantes.
400
India con
million people,
1.410
European
millones,
Union
la
with
Unión Europea con
447 million, the US
447
with
millones,
333
Estados
million,
Unidos con
Indonesia
373
with
millones, Indonesia con
275 million,
275
and these five
millones.
countries represent
Estos cinco países
67%,
representan el
67.8% of the world's
67.8% de
population.
la población
It's
mundial.
important to know
Esto es
because we will
importante
measure as
saberlo
well
porque
within these
mediremos también
integration
dentro de
organisms
los
the
organismos de
weight that
integración
BRICS
el
has
peso que
in
tiene el
terms of
BRICS en
populational weight.
términos del peso
Also in the
poblacional
world
también en la
geopolitics and
geopolítica
populational.
mundial y
We have other
poblacional, ¿no?
countries that are
Hay otros
important
países también
considering this process
importantes
like
considerados en
Brazil,
esos procesos,
not
decir Brasil,
because they have more
no porque
millions than
tenga más
China or
millones pues
India
que
or the
China,
US
que
or
India, que
than the
Estados
European
Unidos
Union,
o
which
que
is
la
that
Unión
we
Europea,
have 5,000
sino porque en
municipalities that vote
5.000
and we have
municipios que
over
votan,
100
ellos tienen
million
más de
citizens. And
100
in the
millones de
case of
ciudadanos.
Mexico,
Igual
they
en el
also have
caso de
that kind of
México
weight.
tiene también ese
Bangladesh,
peso.
171 million.
Bangladesh tiene
Russia
171 millones.
has
Rusia
144 million.
tiene
And Mexico
144
has
millones. Y
127.
México que tiene
I don't want to get you all
127.
dizzy with
Yo no
numbers and
quiero
statistics, but it's
marearlos con
important to know
cifras,
the
pero es importante
populational
conocer el
weight of
peso
what
poblacional de lo
being
que se
around
está
the level around
moviendo
in the
ahora en el
world that
mundo,
represents
que
more
representa
than half
más
of
de
the
la población,
population in
más
the
de la
world.
mitad de la
I would
población
like to
mundial.
mention and looking
Quiero
forward to
comentarles,
this
entre paréntesis,
article into
que
detail
este
and being
artículo
turned
al
over to
detalle
Latin
es
so we
entregado a
can put it at
Latindar para
your
ponerlo a
disposal.
disposición de todos ustedes.
That's important
Ello
because
es
definitely
importante
it
porque
changes the
efectivamente
geopolitics
cambia la
in the world,
geopolítica
and that's
en el
a really
mundo y
specific
esto es un
theme
tema
and topic
determinante
for us.
también para
In the
nosotros, ¿no?
case of Latin America,
En
we
el caso
will
de América Latina se van a
have
dar
6
6
elections this year. And the
elecciones en
first
este
one
año.
is was
La
already for
primera
El
ya fue
Salvador.
en El
And in the
Salvador.
article that
En el artículo
I'm
que les
sending you,
envío,
of
efectivamente
course,
hablo
already talking
sobre
about
Bukele,
Bukele, a subcycle which is
en
called
un subtítulo que se llama
Lights and
Luces y Sombras,
Shades,
porque si
because
bien es
if it was
cierto,
foreseen for
estaba
him to
previsto que él
win, and
ganaría,
all the
y
surveys
así
were
lo
saying that,
señalaban todas las
it's
encuestas,
important
es
that we can make
importante
this
que
effort to
relativicemos
be
este
more
triunfo,
relative, because
porque
48% of the
48%
population
de la población se
uh,
abstuvo, no fue a votar.
went to vote,
16% votó
16
por los
voted by other
candidatos. Por lo
candidates.
tanto,
So we're talking
estamos
about 48 plus
48
16, we're
más
talking about
16 ante
64%
un
of the population population of El Salvador
de la
that
población de El
didn't vote
Salvador que
for
no
Bukele.
votó por Bukele.
There's some
Hay
that are
quienes
excited
están
by the
entusiasmados
or with
con
the
la
fight
lucha contra la
against
delincuencia,
crime, but
pero
for the
efectivamente
human
para
rights
los organismos de derechos
organizations, they
humanos,
are the
que
ones
son los que
in the
ponen las
shade,
urnas,
in the shadow. We have
efectivamente estamos
74,000
con 74.000
prisoners,
presos,
214 dead,
214 muertos
and the
y la
majority of
mitad
them in
de
one
ellos
only
en un
prison.
solo penal
With
con
organizations that have been
organizaciones
reporting
que
the
vienen
situation.
denunciando
So I think
esta
that it's an
situación.
important point,
Creo
and we
que ese
need
tema
to
es
make this
importante y tenemos que
government into
caracterizar
character
ese gobierno
as an
como un
authoritarian
gobierno
government,
autoritario,
punitive, populist,
punitivo,
and of right.
populista
Why am
y
I
de
saying this?
derecha.
Because we
¿Por qué
can
lo digo?
build an
Porque se
authoritarian
construye
Axel
un eje
Milei,
autoritario,
Bukele,
Milei, Bukele,
Noboa,
Noboa,
and
Boluarte en el
Boluarte
Perú.
in Peru.
Y
And that's
esto es
something
un
that we
tema
need
que
to take into
tenemos que
account.
tener en cuenta.
I'm going back to the
Regresando un
European Union
minutito
because I
a la Unión
just jumped
Europea,
into
porque me he
the
pasado de la Unión
whole
Europea
story and carrying on with Latin
antes de
America.
seguir con lo de América
It's
Latina,
important to know
es
that
importante saber
it's
que se
47 countries
eligen
of the
47 países de la Unión
when we
Europea,
choose
perdón, se eligen, digamos,
447 million
447
people that
millones de
vote in the European
personas
Union,
eligen en la Unión
705
Europea 705
units.
diputados.
So we
Se
hope
estima
to
que
have
habrá
a
un avance
conservative
considerable.
base.
Es decir,
Bukele
Bukele me
reminded
hizo
me of this
recordar ese
conservative
avance
base that
conservador que se da en
takes place in
Europa,
Europe, being
siendo
aware of the advances
diferente
that
a los avances
are
que se
taking
dan en
place in
América
Latin
Latina.
America.
En el caso de
In Panama,
Panamá,
we
que
had a
estaba
preference in
como
the
preferente en
surveys
las encuestas,
with President
el
Martinelli.
presidente
He has
Martinelli
requested asylum,
ha
and the
pedido asilo,
Nicaraguan government
el
has given him
gobierno de
asylum.
Nicaragua le ha
However,
dado
their
asilo,
own government
sin
has not given
embargo,
them
su propio
a
gobierno no
document,
le ha dado
and
salvoconducto, así
that's
que
why we are in a
estamos ahí en
problem.
un
Then we have
impasse.
Dominican
Luego
Republic and
siguieron
Uruguay.
República Dominicana y
Their
Uruguay,
elections have been
termina la
carried
reelección de
on
Abinader,
from
un gobierno
an
autoritario de un
authoritarian
economista
economist, a bit settlement,
empresario,
and then Uruguay
y
advances. And we
avanza en
hope to
Uruguay.
have
Se
uh,
esperaría un triunfo del Frente Amplio,
victory that will
que irá
open then
primero a las
for
PASO,
primaries,
después
and
a las
that's the
primarias,
primary
y
we can
después,
go to the
después
first
de
and
las
second
primarias a
round,
la primera y
and
luego a
it
la
will
segunda
close
vuelta.
in
Y
with
cierran
the
el
year with
año
U.S.
Estados
Venezuela.
Unidos
We've
y
seen
Venezuela.
how
Hemos
Trump
visto
has
efectivamente
been
cómo Trump ha
uh,
venido
having
litigando
problems to
para poder
become
ser
a
candidato.
candidate.
Todavía
The tribunal that's going
el
to
tribunal,
decide his
digamos, que va a
situation, the
decidir su
tribunal
situación,
where
es
three
un
individuals
tribunal en
have
los
been
cuales tres
appointed
personas han sido nombradas por
by
Trump.
parts.
Efectivamente, la
Impartiality is in
imparcialidad
doubt, of
está en
course, and
duda. Por
you
supuesto que si participa, se
we
estima que
estimate
podría ser el ganador
that
con un Biden que día a día
the,
se cae.
the
En el
winner with
caso
a
de
Biden
Venezuela,
that's
no hay
falling,
una
collapsing
precisión
more
de
and
las
more.
elecciones aún.
Election
Ha
terms,
sido ha
Corina
salido,
Machado has
digamos,
been
Corina Machado, ha sido
disabled,
inhabilitada, por lo tanto
and
no
we hope
participa y
that
se espera
the
que la
constitutional
oposición
opposition can introduce
constitucional
an alternative
presente
candidate.
candidato también
In the case of
alternativo, ¿no?
wars,
En el
which
caso de las guerras, que
uh,
ya
um,
de forma más
have been
detallada has
explained by Enrique
explicado
Gaza
Enrique
in greater
Daza,
detail, we are facing an
efectivamente estamos
expansion of
ante una
NATO
expansión de la
in
OTAN
the
en lo que es la
Russian
guerra
war with
de Rusia contra la OTAN y
NATO and
Estados Unidos, que se
in
da en el
Russia.
territorio de Ucrania.
We
Se estima un
estimate
triunfo de Rusia.
time for
Se
Russia.
pensó que esa guerra iba
We
a ser muy corta y ya
forecasted to
superó
be
los
a
2 años
short
y
war,
no
but
se
it's
ve
already been
todavía la
2
fecha de un
years,
cierre. En el
and
caso
no
de Palestina,
nothing
el
that
mundo
will come to
entero
fruition
ha
just yet.
señalado pues que no
And
estamos ante una
in
guerra, que
Palestine,
estamos
we're
ante un
talking about
genocidio. Se
genocide.
habla de
In
un
Pakistan, we're
infanticidio,
talking
se
about
habla de un
genocide.
gasacidio.
However,
Sin
Lula
embargo,
this
Lula
week,
esta
facing
semana
the Union of
ante la
African
Unión de
States,
Estados
has
Africanos,
addressed
efectivamente
and said that we are
señaló que
facing a
estábamos ante
genocide as
un
we may among,
genocidio,
I
como
think, in the
pensamos
world.
muchísimos
However, I
inmigrantes
think
en el mundo, y sin
the
embargo en su país el
Bolsonarism is
bolsonarismo
after
pretende
an
un
impeachment
impeachment contra
against
Lula, es
Lula,
decir, un juicio
meaning
político
political
como consecuencia del lobby
trial because
israelí
of the
que se ha
Israeli
producido en
lobby.
todo el mundo, ¿no?
Then in
Luego, por
the
supuesto, en el
warfare
escenario
scenario,
de
the article
guerras, el
mentions that
artículo
we
también lo
have
señala,
anti-colonial
estamos
wars in
con
the
guerras
case of
anticoloniales. En el caso del
Arabic
Frente Polisario de la
Democratic Republic,
República Árabe
whereas this
Democrática
the
contra la
occupation of
ocupación
Moroccan
de la monarquía marroquí desde el
occupation,
año
and we are in the
76.
case of Africa,
Estamos en el
in the
caso de África ante
last
el
stage
último
of
espacio
anti-colonial
de
fight, and
lucha
it's important
anticolonial
of
y
backing
de
it
ahí la
up.
importancia de
We have the
respaldarlo.
name of Oman,
Siguen
Mali,
Yemen,
Lebanon,
Myanmar,
Pakistan,
Mali,
Sri
Líbano,
Lanka,
Pakistán,
Nigeria,
Sri Lanka, Nigeria, Siria, al margen de las
and
guerras de las
marginally
que
from
salió Estados Unidos,
the wars in
como
the
ya nos la
U.S. came
señaló
about.
Enrique
I
Daza.
want to say
Yo
that
quiero
this is
decir que estamos ante qué
facing
tendencias
different trends,
estamos.
where we are
Uno se
facing
mantiene
a
una
common
tendencia
trend of
principal.
growth
Crece
amidst trust because
la
of the
desconfianza frente
democratic
al actual sistema
system. We're
democrático.
talking
Se
about
habla
a
efectivamente de
democratic
una
recession,
recesión
just a
democrática,
financial
no
recession.
solo de
We're
una
talking
recesión
about the
económica.
degradation of
Se habla de una
democracy,
degradación de la
of a pouring
democracia,
out
se habla de
of
un
the democracy,
vaciamiento
given that the current
democrático,
system is
ya que el
incapable of
sistema
providing
actual es
solutions
incapaz
to
de
the great
obtener
majority
soluciones a las
and
grandes
it
mayorías,
provides
de
solutions to
obtener soluciones a
warfare,
la guerra,
everything
deterioro
about the fraud,
ambiental, al crimen organizado, a
crime,
la economía
concentration of
informal,
wealth,
a la concentración de
and
la
increase
riqueza
of
y a la
inequality
ampliación
gaps.
de brecha de
And of
desigualdad.
course, the
Por
crisis
supuesto que
will
si vamos a ver la
remain,
crisis
and
migratorias, ya
they
se señaló que
represent 100
representan
million
100
refugees,
millones los
and back
refugiados y
then we are
desplazados
facing a
en ese
migration
momento y
of
estamos ante la crisis migratoria
crisis, which is the most
más
representative in the
representativa
history
y
of
mayor de la
humanity.
historia de la humanidad. Por supuesto que va a
There
haber
will be
crisis
climate
climática,
crisis, and
con
that
lo que
means
significa, digamos,
that there's an extractive
la
nature of the
economía
economy,
extractivista, la
devastation from
degradación
crimes against
y los
nature,
delitos
climate death,
contra la
and of
naturaleza, la
course,
deuda climática y, por supuesto,
development that
un desarrollo que
won't
no
comply
cumplirá
with
con las metas de los ODS al 2030 porque hay una
the
inversión
Sustainable
fundamentalmente en la
Development
guerra
Goals
y
because
nuestro
they're not
voto tendría que
including
ser
the
contra
war
la
and they
guerra
shouldn't
en
the war and
defensa de
protection
los
of
derechos de la
nature and people.
naturaleza y de los
Of
derechos de
course,
la persona. Por
we will
supuesto
have this
que
sanitary
se va a
crisis.
sumar, la
It will
crisis
remain
sanitaria
in
se
Peru.
mantiene. En el
We
Perú tenemos
haven't
enfermedades que habían sido
surpassed,
superadas
and right
y que
now
hoy
they
día
have a
tienen
high
un alto costo
life
también de
cost.
vida,
Like
como lo fue ya
COVID
el
one,
COVID,
a quarter
que
million
tuvimos
people.
casi un cuarto de millón de personas
We keep
fallecidas.
the
Se
global
mantiene el
disorder
desorden
remains, the
global, se
geopolitical tensions
mantienen las tensiones
are kept,
geopolíticas,
the
se
hegemony,
mantiene el
the tie
empate
down of the
hegemónico
polar
entre el
world,
mundo
the multipolar
unipolar y el
world
mundo
remain.
multipolar, sin que se
And for
produzca un
experts in that
desenlace.
matter,
Para
this
expertos en
might
esa
become
materia,
a
esto
10 to
pudiese
15
transitar entre
year
10
guarantee
años
with the
y
most
15.
important
Quizás la
affliction, which is
reflexión más
from this wave
importante
value
nueva
from
esta
another
semana
money that
es de
says that we
Manolo
don't have a
Monedero,
safe
que nos dice que no tiene
security.
la
And
seguridad
they ask
y se
themselves
plantea un
question if this transit
interrogante,
is going
si
to
este
be able to
tránsito
take
se
place
va a poder
without a war,
realizar
because that's
sin
definitely
una
the
guerra,
attitude of
porque
a power
efectivamente
in
la
the
disputa
world
del
will
poder
be looking us to
mundial
keep in the
buscaría
military
mantener la
integration as
intervención
a key
militar
element of
como
the
un
imperial
elemento
order.
clave del orden
Is still
imperial,
under the
hoy
hegemony
aún
of the
bajo
USA.
hegemonía de
It is
Estados
a
Unidos.
consolidation
Esta
of
es
the
una
monetary
reflexión
domain.
preocupante que
And
nos
of
hace
course,
Monedero, ¿no? Y por
there's no
supuesto, la derecha no tiene
intention
ninguna
on making any
intención
concession
de
in
hacer
this phase of
concesiones en
global
este
dispute,
espacio de
and of
disputa
course,
global.
it's
Por
important
supuesto que hay
persistent.
importantes
And in the time of
resistencias
not
y
allowing
el
us to
tiempo ya
develop
nos
better
permite
skills,
desarrollar eso
and then
con un arriba
have
nervioso y
something
un
that moves
abajo que se
around this
mueve en
resistance.
esas
Thank you very much,
resistencias.
Marshall, for the
Muchísimas
interruption, but
gracias. Mucha
we
disculpa por
are
la interrupción,
around.
pero ya estamos
Thank
ahí como
you,
que
thank you very
con
much
poco
again
tiempo.
for the
Muchísimas
comments.
gracias a Tatiana,
And we
Claudia,
have
por los
some questions that
comentarios.
we've been
Tenemos ya algunas
solving
preguntas que
from the
hemos ido
audience
recibiendo
already.
de la
We
audiencia.
have
También tenemos dos
questions from
preguntas,
the
una de
Alicia from the
Daniela
financial
Oreja del
area,
área
the
de nueva
Apollo from
arquitectura
the area of
financiera y
the
otra de Adrián
fiscal
Falco del área de
acquisitionist.
justicia
Please
fiscal.
make it
Por
brief
favor,
so
que
we
sean
can
súper
go
breves para que
back to
después podamos
Julia
pasar y demos
and we
nuevamente a
can
Julia,
close
a
out the
Enrique y
questions
a
to these
cerrar con
questions
sus
that we really
respuestas a
not
estas
answer. So
preguntas que
please,
vamos a leer
Daniela,
en un momento.
if
Así que
you
Daniela, por
can
favor, si
quickly ask
puedes
us your question or
rápidamente hacer
comment,
tu
and after
pregunta,
that, Adrian,
comentario
please.
y después Adrián, por favor.
Thank you very much,
Muchas
Carola,
gracias,
and
Carola.
the
Agradecer también
panelists and
a los panelistas,
commenters.
comentaristas. Creo que
I
nos
think
llevamos
that we
insumos
take
muy, muy
away
importantes.
important things. I would like to make
Quisiera
a
hacer
brief
un
comment
breve comentario,
specific
dos preguntas
question.
bastante puntuales.
The comment
El
is more
comentario
related
es,
to
creo que está
Julia's
más relacionado a la
comment.
presentación de Julia.
We're talking
Creo
about
que
a
hablar
high
de alto
endowment system,
endeudamiento de
and it's
inversión es un poco más
complicated, and
complejo.
there's a
Hay alguna
heterogeneity in the
heterogeneidad en la
computation and
situación del
calculation of
endeudamiento en nuestros
countries. And I
países,
highlight
pero sí es
the
cierto y
problem of
rescato
the service of debt,
el problema
which
del
is
servicio de la
higher
deuda, ¿no?
in
Es cada vez
cost,
más
interest
alto,
rates
los
are
costos, las
higher, they
tasas de
will
interés son más
remain
elevadas, se van a
be
mantener todavía
still
elevadas. Y lo que
elevated,
quería
and we have
rescatar
two
ahí era
aspects which
dos
are
aspectos
contextual,
de
and one is
contexto.
that the
Uno de
countries
ellos
of the
es
region are
los países de la región
satisfied
están
mean
clasificados como ingreso medio, lo que
grows
limita el acceso a
income,
financiamiento
and
concesional.
basically
Entonces
they
esto también
becomes another
suma un
obstacle
obstáculo
in the countries
adicional
of
a
the
los
region.
países en
And
la
the second
región.
point is
Y el
related to
segundo punto
a
está relacionado
return
a
to the fiscal
un
debt,
retorno a
austerity
las reglas
measures, and
fiscales, medidas de
that's
austeridad,
going
lo que
to
también va,
displace
digamos,
and limit the
desplazando,
capacity of
limitando la
implementing
capacidad de
social
implementar
policies of
políticas
health and
sociales, salud,
conservation, climate
educación,
responsible.
respuesta al cambio climático,
So I would
entre
like to
otros.
add up those
Entonces
two
quería
points,
agregar esos
and my
dos
questions
puntos y
are,
mis preguntas
I think
son,
that
me parece que se ha
we've
puesto
put this
más
more onto the public
en la
agenda
agenda
of the
pública
systemic crisis
este
from the
tema de la
giving
crisis
us
climática y el
we made a
endeudamiento, cómo
feedback.
se retroalimentan.
And I believe that
Y
this upcoming
creo que en
year
este y el
we
siguiente
have
año
spaces and
tenemos
opportunity
espacios y me parece
to
oportunidades
build a lot
para
unifying
construir
voices
alianzas,
from
unificar
the
voces
different
desde
movements
diferentes movimientos
for these international pieces that
para
are
estos
coming
espacios
over
internacionales que se
in the
avecinan.
region,
Varios de
like
ellos
the
son de la región.
presidency of
Uno de ellos es
G20
la
in
presidencia
Brazil,
del G20 en Brasil.
and there's also
Este año
the
también tenemos
biodiversity COP
la
in
COP de biodiversidad en
Colombia,
Colombia, las discusiones sobre la nueva meta
the collective
colectiva
actors
sobre el
on
financiamiento
climate change,
climático, Después
First
tenemos
COP30
la
in Brazil,
COP30 en Brasil
and maybe the fourth
y
financing
posiblemente la
conference on
cuarta
development
conferencia de
in Beijing.
financiamiento para el desarrollo
So
de
I
los
believe that
próximos
these two
años.
upcoming
Entonces,
years
creo que estos 2 años que vienen
will be really relevant
serán muy relevantes, ¿no? Para tratar de
to show
posicionar
these
nuestras
proposals on
propuestas y
demand. My
demandas.
second
Y
question
mi segunda
is
pregunta
related to
está
an
relacionada a,
increasing
hay un creciente
call out to
llamado a una
reform of
reforma de la
the
arquitectura
architecture.
financiera.
Maybe my perception is
Quizás la
that
percepción es que las instituciones del Bretton
we put
Woods
some
no
eyes
hayan
on
visto
the
los ojos
reform of
sobre la
the
reforma de
digital
los marcos de capital
capital
de los bancos
markets.
de desarrollo, bancos
And
multilaterales de desarrollo.
my question is,
Entonces,
what
mi
is the
consulta
role
es,
that you
¿qué
think that
rol
these
ven que deberían
multilateral
tener
banks should
estos
have in the
bancos
climate
multilaterales
financing and
en
the
el financiamiento
circumcision
climático, en la
in
transición
case
justa,
you
si es que tienen
they have a role or not?
rol
I
o
would like
no?
to hear your
Me gustaría
opinions.
escuchar
Thank you very much.
sus
Thank you very
opiniones.
much.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Dani. Adrián, si tienes, pero la consulta muy
Adrian,
corta,
if
por
you have a
favor,
question,
y así
please,
se
just
nos está
specific.
yendo el tiempo, por favor.
Thank you, Carola.
Sí,
Thank you
gracias
very much,
Julieta.
Juan
Bueno,
Martin,
gracias
Enrique,
Julia,
Diana, and Claudia, and Mocha
Tatiana,
for your
Claudia y
comments.
Mocha
I
por
have
los
two
comentarios y
really
demás.
specific
Yo tengo
questions.
dos preguntas muy
One has to
puntuales.
do with the
Una
fiscal
tiene que
space
ver con
that
el juicio
Martin
fiscal
was
del que
mentioning, Julia
hablaba
as
tanto
well.
Martín
It has
como
to do with the
Julia, tiene que ver
carbon
con el
tax,
impuesto al
if it's a
carbono.
fake solution,
Si
a
es una falsa
proportionate
solución,
preferred
como
default,
plantearon
or if
algunas
it has
cosas, o si
a
es
measure that is
efectivamente
potentially
una medida
possible.
que es
The
potencialmente
second point
exitosa.
is that maybe to
Lo
Puerto
segundo
Rico as
es,
well, and
quizás para Enrique también y para,
well, Julia,
para
is how do we do
Julia,
to
¿cómo hacemos
merge a
para
need of
conjugar
more
la necesidad de
space
mayor espacio
and the
fiscal,
need for more
la
regulation and
necesidad de
greater
mayor
sanction
regulación y de mayor
to a
sanciones
scheme of
con
corporate
un
power
esquema de poder
that's
corporativo que
input in
está
all countries and that
metido en todos los países
makes
y que
it harder
dificulta
for
muchísimo
the
justamente
exit doors
las
of the
puertas de
present that
salida
are
a esta
greater
crisis, que
enterprises
es
and greater
mayor espacio
regulation and
fiscal y
sanctions from my
mayor
point of
regulación y
view.
sanciones, por lo menos desde mi
Those
punto
are
de
one of the
vista.
things that I wanted to
Esas
say.
eran
Thank you,
las
Carla.
cosas que tenía
Thank
para
you,
plantear.
Adrian.
Muchas
We
gracias.
appreciate also people
Gracias,
that
Adrián.
have
Agradecemos también
shared
a
their
las personas que
questions
nos
and
han compartido
Valeria,
sus
it says,
preguntas.
rescata la caída de la
Valeria
Constitución
decía que
by
es
being
contradictorio que el Acuerdo de París,
in the
siendo un
adoption of
tratado
language that we
vinculante,
mean
no aplique
for
medidas necesarias
non-compliant countries.
si los
We,
países
it's not
incumplen.
possible to consider
¿Por qué no es
some
posible
heavy
considerar mecanismos
mechanisms in the
sancionatorios en
international
apoyo
community to really
internacional? Es
question
una
at the
pregunta muy
national level those
interesante y
countries
de
that are
hecho a nivel
already
nacional ya hay
applying
países que están
national
aplicando
legislation. Digamos,
legislaciones
how
nacionales.
can you
Y
believe you
Guillermo
can
dice, ¿cómo
create
creen que se puede
this
conjugar
problematic
dichas
climate
problemáticas,
and
lo
nuclear from the
climático, lo nuclear desde la
conceptualization of the integral
conceptualización
economy
de la
or
economía
integral ecology?
integral? Ecología
And we
integral,
also had a
perdón.
question
Y también
from
teníamos una
Georgina
consulta
about what are
de
the
Georgina
challenges
que decía cuáles son los retos y
composed
desafíos de las organizaciones sociales en este contexto de
societies and
crisis
groups in
climática,
defense of
crisis
the
ambiental
decision
y
makers, and
diferencia en
how
los
do we make
tomadores de
visible
decisión,
the
¿no? Y cómo
differentiated impact
visibilizamos los
in women,
impactos diferenciados
which are the
justamente en
ones
las
in
mujeres,
charge of the
que son las
economy here,
encargadas de la
and
economía de
for
los
companies that
cuidados y
don't pay
las
for that
empresas que
type
no
of
pagan este
work that
trabajo
are
a disposición
associated
de la
with
fuerza de trabajo
labor
de estas
force. So
empresas.
there's
Son
different
varias
questions. Several
preguntas. Les voy
questions
a
again,
dar, por favor,
Julia,
2 minutos a
and
Julia
Enrique,
y
2 minutes
Enrique
for
para
you
que
can
ustedes
summarize
puedan
your questions and
sintetizar
trying
sus
to
respuestas y tratar
touch
de abordar
some
los
of the
temas
topics that
que
you have
ustedes
more experience with.
tienen más
Please, Julia.
experiencia. Adelante, empecemos con Julia, por favor.
Thank you very much, Carola. I had
Gracias,
some
Carola. Bueno,
questions
me
a
quedaron
bit
algunas.
limelight.
Empiezo por el principio. Creo que Daniela
Just as what
habló
Daniela mentioned
de la
about the
reforma de los bancos multilaterales de
multilateral
desarrollo
banks,
y en
I
ese
mean,
sentido, ¿no?
just as we've
De la
heard
reforma de
before,
los comités de
particularly for
financiamiento nacional
multilateral banks of
y
development,
particularmente los bancos multilaterales de
I'll
desarrollo.
mention an example
Voy a mencionar, por
in some of the
ejemplo,
cases that we've
algunos casos que vengo
been
siguiendo
following up
más
have
de
to do with
cerca,
the
que
new
tienen que ver con,
reform
¿no? Con la nueva
that
reforma que
the
está
World Bank
proponiendo
Group is proposing
el Grupo
with
Banco
the
Mundial, ¿no? Con la
new proposal
alineación,
of
con
aligning
una nueva propuesta
ourselves
de
to the
alineación
Paris Agreement at
al
1.5,
Acuerdo de
where they
París
call them the larger
1.5, que llaman la
1.5,
metodología de
probably
1.5,
and the
que
alignment
ustedes
you
también
know. And
pueden
around
conocer.
there, I think
Por
it's
ahí me
important to
parece
bring into
importante
light
traer, ¿no?
this double
Como
standard or this
este
double
doble estándar,
measurement rod that's
esta doble vara, ¿no? Que
still
sigue
going
primando, por
on
un lado,
one side,
la
the
falta
lack
de
of representativeness
representatividad de
of
los
the global
países
south of these
del sur
institutions and the
global,
lack
estas
of governance and lack
instituciones,
of
¿no? La falta de
transparency, and
gobernanza, falta de
also,
transparencia, y en
in a
segundo
way, this
lugar,
double
de
standard
algún modo este doble
of
estándar
making
de
yourself a
big
big
champion o
champion
como
of,
eh,
in a
de algún
way,
modo
putting into the
poniendo
limelight
de
the
relieve
fact that they
que están
are
invirtiendo, ¿no?
investing
Que están
onto
invirtiendo
measures for
en
climate
medidas y en
change
políticas
that
para el
at the
cambio
same
climático,
time
pero que a su vez
have
tienen un
a really
approach
very vertical approach where we can
verticalista, en
see
donde queda de
that
lado,
there's
por
still
ejemplo,
the
plantear
setup of projects from communities,
proyectos desde las
from
comunidades, los
decentralized
territorios,
projects
proyectos
that are
descentralizados, ¿no?
completely
Donde se ve muy claro en el
that
Fondo de
through their
Recuperación
World Bank
Social
and
que
the
hay muchas
investment, they're aiming
inversiones, ¿no?
towards a
Hacia
mega
proyectos de
infrastructure
mega
projects
infraestructura que están
where
generando muchas
putting
veces
in or vulnerating the principles of
los principios de
consultation of countries.
consulta en los propios
So there's
países, en
still
los
a lot
territorios,
to
entonces
work,
como que hay mucho para
a
trabajar
lot to
ahí,
do
o por otro lado
in
también
every end of the
continuando
picture
tener
and
una
pushing
continuación, por
forward
ejemplo, de
projects
there's a profile gas in Latin
países de
America and
Latinoamérica,
African
en
countries.
países de África,
Sort of
entonces
that
como
double
ese
standard that
doble
many of these
estándar
international
tienen mucho a las
financial
instituciones financieras
institutions have.
internacionales.
And in second
Y en
place,
segundo lugar,
maybe
tal vez
I
comentarle
comment
un
more
poco
responding
a
to
Adrián,
Adrian,
y no sé
and I don't know if I'm
si
answering
respondo
correctly or specifically to the question,
específicamente a la
but I
pregunta, pero
believe
me
that
parece
one final
que
comment
un
after
comentario final que después de escuchar
hearing all of these
todas las intervenciones
interventions,
refiere a
we think that we could go back
volver,
to
¿no? Muchas veces
sustainability
hablan de
of the
sostenibilidad,
debt
de
and
sostenibilidad de la
to
deuda
go
y
back to
a
the
nosotros por
concept
ahí
of
nos gusta volver al concepto
sustainability
de
of life.
sostenibilidad de la vida,
We can
y
think about this,
pensar
or that we can think that many
muchas de las
times it's
veces
a
estamos
political will
con la
matter, not
política
lack
y
of
la cuestión de
resources,
falta de
because
recursos,
resources
porque los recursos
are
están
there,
destinados, los
are
recursos están y
destined
están destinados en
to
este caso, como
what our
mencionaban las
colleagues
discusiones
mentioned,
compañeros y compañeras,
to the
eh,
armamentistic
a la carrera
pathway
armamentista
and to warfare.
y a la guerra.
So
Entonces,
I believe that
me parece que ahí
there's
un poco
still we'll go
siempre
back
volvemos al
again
meollo de la
to
cuestión
the core of a problem,
no es una cuestión
which
de falta de
is not
recursos,
only
sino
a
cuestión
lack of
de dónde
resources, but
eligen
actually
poner
knowing
o
how to
destinar esos recursos. Así
allocate
que
those
esos comentarios,
resources
no sé
that
si
are already
seguramente
there.
podemos seguir debatiendo, pero
So
eso,
those are my
esas
reactions
breves
to
reacciones.
the question. Thank you.
Muchas gracias,
Okay,
Julia.
so
Le paso la palabra entonces a Enrique, por
open my
favor,
Enrique
para
so
que
he
pueda
can answer
responder
these
también
comments
a
or
las preguntas.
the questions.
Yo
Well, I
pienso
believe that
que,
we
que hay que
need to
ser
be really
cuidadosos
careful with
los
the
enfoques que
approach at the
tienen
World Bank and the
los
Monetary
bancos,
Fund
el
and
Fondo
big
Monetario y las
corps
grandes
are
corporaciones, que se
putting
den
up,
cuenta que hay una
because there's a huge
crisis,
crisis
que
in the
el
system that
sistema
has
no
not
tiene
understand and
salida
exit or a
y
solution,
que
and they
deben
want to
hacer
make reforms
reformas que
that are
sean
compatible with the
compatibles
system the way it
con
is
el
right.
sistema tal como
United
funciona.
Nations have
Las Naciones
shown how
Unidas, pues han
inefficient they are.
demostrado su
And there's not
ineficiencia
only, not even
para
only
tomar sus
one
decisiones por
important
parte de las Naciones
decision
Unidas, por
that's
ejemplo, que haya
progressive
sido
or
aprobada
implemented.
o
The
implementada
IMF
el Fondo Monetario
across the
Internacional y
world
todo el
is
mundo
trying
está
to decrease
criticando,
debt,
está tratando de disminuir la
right?
deuda,
But they need
¿sí? Pero
in
resulta
the
que el enfoque
IMF's approach,
del Fondo Monetario
they need to understand that it's to ensure
es para
the
garantizar el
flow
fondo
of capital
de
and
los
merchandise
capitales y
isn't the
las
concern
mercancías
or
sino
debt
la
is the
ocupación de la
debt of a
deuda. Esa
country in
deuda de los
development, but the
países en
debt of the
desarrollo,
US,
la
nobody
deuda de
questions
Estados Unidos no es
it,
la
or
cuestión,
the
la deuda
Western
constituye
Europe. So we need to know
entonces hay
how
que
to
saber
differentiate
diferenciar cuál es el
the
tema de la
debt
deuda
and its
y
relation
la
with
relación de eso
development.
con el desarrollo.
I believe that it's
Yo
going to
creo
be really hard
que va a
to
ser muy
make a
difícil
reform
hacer una
within the
reforma dentro del marco
range of
legal de
institutions.
instituciones que realmente beneficie a los pueblos.
And I think it's
Yo creo que
necessary
es
to look
necesario buscar
after
formas,
different
buscar
strategies of
maneras
mechanism
de
of
mitigar
financing
esas
that are coming
diferencias
up
que están
that are
surgiendo, que
multiple
son
and that we
múltiples
need to try to
y que
construct
hay que
them.
tratar de construirlos.
For example,
El
there's
Fondo
no
Monetario es una cuestión,
multilateralism
no hay crisis del
crisis. We have
hay
crisis of
crisis de
certain
cierto
multilateralism,
multilateralismo,
of the
crisis del
pre-colonized
multilateralismo
multilateralism of
protagonizado
certain
por las grandes
corps,
corporaciones.
like, for
Es el último
example, the
mecanismo, por ejemplo,
Organization of
la
Shanghai Work
Organización de Cooperación de Shanghái
and
funciona,
the
¿sí? Y
Euro-Asian
volvió a la Unión
Cooperation, different
Europea
other
porque hay otro tipo
multilateralisms
de
work that are
multilateralismos
alternate.
que son alternos. Lo que pasa
And
es que
when we talk about the
nosotros
global
cuando hablamos
situation,
de la
we need
situación
to
global
perceive not
tenemos que
just what
percibir
happens in
no
this
únicamente lo que
hemisphere,
pasa en este
but
hemisferio,
rather the
sino el conjunto de
group
la
of
situación mundial,
international
por lo
situations
cual
which
es
will
muy
allow us
válido hacer una
to
crítica
have a
muy
better
radical
and clearer look at
al
the
Fondo
global
Monetario, al Banco
fund,
Mundial, a los mecanismos
IMF, and so
internacionales.
on. We need to detect,
¿Sí? Nosotros
for
tenemos que
example, all
verificar,
this
por ejemplo, todo este
banking
tema de la crisis
crisis has
bancaria
a lot to
tiene que
do
ver
with
mucho con
development of
el mismo
investment
desarrollo
funds
de
that
los
are
fondos de inversión que están
distributed by banks.
sustituyendo a los bancos.
So I think that there
O sea,
we need to
ahí
provide a
tenemos que
more
tener un pensamiento
wholesome
más complejo y más
thought
integral
about the
alrededor de la
different
realidad
realities of the world.
global del mundo.
Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias. Perdón, Enrique, si tenías alguna intervención más
No,
o ya
that's it.
estamos
Thank
bien.
you. Thank you very
Sí, bueno,
much
muchísimas
to our
gracias
speakers.
a nuestros
Thank you very much
presentadores,
to
presentadoras,
our
a nuestros
commenters, to
comentaristas
the
también,
people
las
in
personas que
the
nos han apoyado con la
interpretation
interpretación y
service.
a toda la audiencia de
All of
este
these
evento. Realmente son
organization
temas
points are really
complejos.
complex. We would need a lot more
Necesitaríamos muchísimos más
deepen
para
onto
seguir
this topic. We
profundizando en
will
estos
keep on
temas, pero
promoting
vamos
these
a ir
spaces.
promoviendo estos espacios, estos
Thank you very
diálogos.
much for
Muchísimas
all the
gracias más bien por
interventions
todas
and
las
sharing so much
intervenciones, por compartir tanta
information.
información
That's
que nos va a
going
dejar
to leave us thinking
reflexionando
quite a lot with
bastante,
a lot
y
of
yo creo que
concern, but
también
we
mucha
should lose
preocupación,
hope, and
pero no hay
that's
que perder
something
la
that will
esperanza.
forward with.
con lo que
We can
quisiera
still
cerrar,
change,
¿no?
we can
Podemos
still
todavía cambiar
transform
y
systems,
transformar
we can
estos
still
sistemas, podemos
go rise
todavía
to.
resolver
If
estas
we get
crisis si
granted,
nos
if we
unimos,
fight
si
together, because
luchamos
we have a
juntas,
lot of
juntos.
forces,
Tenemos mucha fuerza
contributing
dentro de los
movements, and the
movimientos, la organización
civil society
civil, las
organizations
organizaciones de sociedad
represent
civil,
a huge
una
strength
fortaleza
in
muy grande en la generación
organizationally
de
in
narrativas,
data.
de
I
datos.
think that we
Creo que
need to
tenemos que
unite and
unirnos y
do
tratar
as much as
de
we can
hacer
to
lo
change
que se
these
pueda
situations,
realmente
which
para
are
cambiar esta situación,
critical.
esta
Multiple
crítica,
crises that are
crisis
taking us to a
múltiple que nos
really
está llevando
dangerous
a un punto
point
muy, muy
where we are
peligroso
putting in risk everyone's
en
lives.
riesgo
So
la
I think
vida
that the
de
big
todos y
way is
todas.
that we should
Entonces,
always hope
creo que el mensaje es ese, no perdamos la esperanza,
that
unámonos
remain
y
together
sigamos
and
luchando y
putting this
poniendo
topic
estos temas en
into
la
our
agenda
agendas
para que se
so we can
atiendan,
get to
¿no?
a good
Muchísimas
point.
gracias
Thank
a
you very
quienes nos han
much
acompañado, nos hemos
to
excedido unos
everyone
minutos.
for
Espero que
tuning
tengan
the
un buen
15 minutes that
resto
we've taken and
de
we'll keep
jornada.
talking about
Vamos
the
a seguir
spaces. Thank you
promoviendo
very
estos
much and have a
espacios.
nice day.
Muchísimas gracias a todos y todas. Hasta luego, que tengan buenas tardes.
Gracias, hasta luego.